Before we dive in, drop a quick hi in the comments. It may seem small, but trust me, it really helps YouTube share this story with more sci-fi fans like us. I'd love to see who's watching.
The processors were worth more than the black tide, and Jace wouldn't stop saying so. 40 million, he said, palms behind his head, boots on the console. Minimum, each crate. Feet down, Marshall said. 40 million per crate, and the man wants my feet down. Collins laughed from the pilot's seat. Bran didn't. Bran was on his back under the starboard coupling, arm buried to the elbow, in a panel that should have been sealed at the shipyard and never was. "This weld's older than Jace's jokes," he called. "Nothing's older than Jace's jokes," Collins said. "Hilarious," Jace said. "All of you. A whole crew of comedians and one functional pilot." The crates sat strapped in the hold behind them, 16 of them. Directorate stamps still on the casings, scratched but not gone, because Bran said scratching them off cost time, and time was the one thing a smuggler couldn't steal back. They'd lifted them off a freight relay 2 systems back. Clean. No shots. Marshall liked clean. "Buyers at Vale Station in 9 hours, Marshall said. "We drift in slow, we drift in quiet." The board lit red. Collins sat forward. The laughter was gone from his voice before it left his mouth. "Contact. Aft. Burning hard." Marshall crossed to the console. "Tag it." Directorate cutter. Collins's hands were already moving. "Reading us. They're reading the cargo." "Of course they're reading the cargo," Jace said, feet down now. "It screams. 16 crates of stolen military silicon. It screams across half the system." "Carter," Bran said from the floor. He'd slid out from under the coupling. "That's Carter's ship, interdiction wing." "How do you know?" "I know the hull profile. Carter's the most stubborn bastard in the Directorate." A voice came through, flat and bored, the boredom of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. "Unregistered freighter. Cut your drive. Prepare to be boarded by order of the Terran Frontier Directorate." Nobody on the black tide moved to cut anything. "He doesn't want us," Marshall said. "He wants what's in the hold." "Comforting," Jace said. "Means he won't shoot the cargo. Means he wants us slow, not dead." Marshall dropped into the seat beside Collins. "Collins, how far to the jump line?" "Too far. He'll have us locked before we're clear." "Then make it not too far." Collins burned the drive. The black tide kicked. Behind them the cutter matched, then gained, because cutters were built to gain, and freighters were built to carry. The gap closed in numbers on Collins's screen, and the numbers were ugly. "He's got firing solution in 90 seconds, Bran said, back at his panel, ripping the cover clean off now. "Maybe less." "The jump drive's not spun up," Collins said. "Spin it up." "From here? Half charged? We don't know what's on the other side of the line. Charts thin out past the Veil. Marshall, there's nothing surveyed out there." 60 seconds, Bran said. Marshall looked at the closing numbers, looked at the half-charged drive. A blind jump on a half-charge could put them inside a star, could tear the ship in half, could do nothing at all and leave them sitting still while Carter walked aboard. "Do it blind," Marshall said. Collins stared at him. "Marshall, 640 million says we don't get boarded. Spin it and throw us anywhere that isn't here." 30 seconds, Bran said. Jace was already strapping in. "I want it on record I said the cargo screams." "Noted," Marshall said. "Collins." Collins's jaw set. He fed the drive everything it had and aimed at a stretch of black nobody had charted, because charted black was where Carter was, and Collins picked the devil he didn't know. Jumping. The cutter fired. The black tide folded. The shot went through space where they'd been. They came out wrong. The drive screamed coming down, half-charge bleeding off in a shudder that ran through the deck and into their teeth. Collins fought the controls. Bran was already swearing at a panel that had cooked itself in the fold. "Where are we?" Marshall said. "I don't know." Collins's voice was tight. "I don't know. The nav can't match anything. There's no beacon. There's no lane." He stopped. "There's a planet. Close. Inhabited. Reading power. Lots of it. Surface grid. Anybody following?" "No. We're alone." A pause. "We jumped blind, Marshall. Nobody followed that." Relief moved through the cabin, small and careful. The relief of men who'd cheated something and weren't sure yet what. "Then we sit down," Marshall said. "Quiet. Fix the drive. Charge it full. Jump back to charted space when nobody's looking. Collins, find me ground." Collins found ground. The city came up under them, gray and vast. Low buildings packed tight around a wide, flat sprawl that had to be a market. Vehicles and bodies moving in it by the thousands. Collins put the black tide down at the edge of it, behind a row of silent freight haulers, and killed the drive. The silence after was total. "Air?" Marshall said. Bran checked. Breathable. Thin. Cold. He frowned at the reader. "Smells wrong, though." Reader says fine. "My gut says wrong." "Your gut isn't certified." "My gut's right more than the reader." They went out anyway, because they needed parts, and the market had parts. And 4 armed humans in a crowd was 4 armed humans in a crowd, no matter whose crowd it was. It wasn't a human crowd. The Sarek were tall and gray-scaled, long-jawed, moving on legs that bent the wrong way. They didn't look at the humans. That was the first thing Marshall clocked. In any market in human space, 4 strangers drew eyes. Here, nothing. The Sarek moved past them with their heads down and their pace quick, and not one of them met an eye. "They're not selling food," Jace said, low. He was right. The stalls weren't stalls. They were pens. Long enclosures ran down the center of the market, filled with captives of a dozen species, perhaps more. None of them Sarek, packed behind bars and standing very still. Gray-uniformed Sarek walked the rows with slates, tapping, marking, sorting. At the end of each row, a ramp climbed into the belly of a transport ship, dull and windowless, and the sorted ones walked up the ramps and did not come down. "That's not a market," Bran said. "That's a loading dock." A family stood near the nearest pen. Sarek, civilian, a parent and 2 small ones. The parent spoke to a uniformed officer, calm, almost bored, and pointed at a third Sarek, older, ragged, head bowed, and signed something on the officer's slate. The officer took the old one by the arm. The family turned and walked away without looking back, the small ones already distracted by something else. "They're turning in their own," Jace said. "Their own people. Like it's nothing." "Debtors," Marshall said. "Outcasts, whatever they call the bottom." He kept his voice flat. "Doesn't matter. Not our problem. Parts, drive, gone." Then a uniformed Sarek stopped in front of them. It looked at the humans the way none of the others had. Up. Down. Up again. Its jaw worked. It had never seen a human before. That was plain on it, in the way it leaned and stared. And it lifted its slate and said something into a translator that came out in clicks the human's ears couldn't parse. "We're just passing," Marshall said, slow, hands open. "Travelers. We don't want trouble." The Sarek clicked again. More of them were turning now. The crowd that hadn't looked at anything was looking at this. "Unregistered," the translator finally spat in broken Terran. "Processing world. Tarsus. Species. Unlisted. Origin. Unlisted. "We'll register," Jace said. "Happy to. Where's the office?" "Unlisted," the Saurik repeated. And it wasn't a question anymore. It was a category. And a category had a procedure. And the procedure was the ramp. More uniforms closed in. Weapons came up, long, thin, humming. Brand's hand went to his sidearm. Marshall caught his wrist. 20 of them, Marshall said under his breath. In a crowd. On their ground. He let go. Not now. They took the humans' weapons. They took them by the arms. And Marshall let it happen, because the math was the math, and a dead crew couldn't fix a drive. The Saurik walked them up the ramp. Behind them, at the city's edge, the sky cracked with a re-entry burn. Brand twisted to look. Through the ramp's closing gap, he saw it. A human cutter, Directorate Gray, dropping through the cloud and slowing over the market. Too late. Hunting a signal that had already gone cold. "Carter," Brand breathed. "He followed the jump signature. He's right there." The ramp sealed. The transport lifted, and the last thing the Black Tide's crew saw of open sky was the alien hull around them folding into the fold of an FTL jump. While below, shrinking, the gray cutter circled the empty market and found nothing but a freighter with 16 stolen crates and no crew to arrest. The transport had no windows, so they learned the prison by its sounds first. The drive cut. The deck tilted. Something huge and mechanical seized the hull and dragged it, and the dragging went on too long, deeper than any docking, down into something. Then the doors opened on Kairos 9. The cold came first. Then the light, gray, sourceless, the flat, dead light of a place that had never seen a sun. They were herded out into a receiving hall the size of a hangar, and the hall was full. Full of species. The pens from the market multiplied 1,000 times, every shape of alien life shuffling in long gray lines toward processing gates at the far wall. Saurik and White walked the lines, not gray uniforms now. White. Clinical white. "This isn't a prison," Brand said. "It's a prison," Marshall said. "No." Brand had stopped walking. A guard shoved him forward and he walked, but his eyes were moving. The mechanic's eyes, reading the room the way he read an engine. Prisons have cells. Where are the cells? There were no cells. There were doors. The lines fed into the processing gates, and past the gates the corridors branched, and the corridors were labeled, not in numbers, but in a Saurik script repeated over and over in colored bands, and Jace, who read fast and read anything, was already trying to crack it. "That one," he murmured, nodding at a band of corridor signage. "Same symbol over every door down that hall. Whatever's behind those doors, it's all the same thing." A processing gate took the human in front of them. A small, gray-furred alien, four-armed, shaking. The Saurik in White scanned it, read the slate, and instead of waving it through, paused. Tapped the slate. Something on the wall above the gate lit amber. 2 more whitecoats came. They took the four-armed alien out of the line. It made a sound, high, looping, the same 3 notes over and over. And they walked it not toward the cells that didn't exist, but down the hall Jace had marked, the one where every door was the same. The notes kept going after the alien was out of sight. Then a door opened and closed somewhere down that hall, and the notes stopped. Cut clean, mid-loop, like a switch thrown. Nobody in the gray lines reacted. They'd heard it before. They knew what the silence meant, and they kept shuffling forward toward the gates with their heads down, the exact way the market crowd had kept their heads down, and Marshall understood for the first time that the head down wasn't fear of the guards. It was knowing. "Marshall," Collins said quietly, "what is this place?" Marshall didn't answer. He was looking at the wall beside the human line, where the white coats stacked the things the processed didn't need any more. A bin, chest high, and in it, sorted and clean and catalogued with little Soric tags, were limbs. Arms, legs, whole and partial, scaled and furred and smooth, a dozen species deep, each one tagged and numbered like parts in Brand's own hold. And on top, fresh, still wearing a sleeve of gray market cloth, a four-armed gray-furred limb that had been attached to something making 3 looping notes about 90 seconds ago. The line moved them forward. The gate took them in. The gate read them one at a time and decided what they were. Marshall went first. A white coat pressed a scanner to his throat, watched a slate, and made a sound. Low, interested. 2 guards pulled him left. Brand came through, and the slate did something different. The white coat leaned in, scanned twice, and Brand went right, hard. 4 guards on him instead of 2. Collins and Jace were waved straight through to a holding floor with the rest of the unremarkable stock. "Marshall," Collins said. "Move when they move," Marshall said over his shoulder, already going. "Don't give them a reason." Then he was gone through a door, and the door was the same as every door. The holding floor was a sea of species. Collins and Jace stood in it and learned the rules by watching. Prisoners moved when a tone sounded. They stopped when it stopped. They held out their arms for scanning without being told. A 6-limbed thing ahead of them missed a tone, distracted or sick, and a guard didn't shout. The guard simply marked the slate. Within a minute, 2 white coats came and walked the 6-limbed thing down a hall, and it didn't fight, and the line closed over the space where it had been like water. "They don't punish," Jace said quietly. "They sort." A Soric in white walked the floor with a younger one trailing behind, taking instruction. The elder gestured across the rows the way a foreman might direct warehouse stock. Hold the furred ones. Send the aquatics to another section. Move the large specimens to the rear. The younger one wrote everything down. Neither lowered a voice. Nothing here needed to be hidden, because nothing here was wrong. The beings in those rows weren't people to them. They were inventory. Above the floor, on a railed platform, a figure watched. Taller. Robed, not coated. 3 others stood a careful step behind it, and the careful step told Collins everything about who it was before he knew the name. The robed one watched the sorting with its hands folded and its long head tilted, and when it moved to leave, the 3 behind it moved exactly when it moved. "That one's not a doctor," Collins said. "No," Jace said. "He's the one who owns the doctors." Elsewhere in the complex, Marshall's processing had taken a different path. They put him in a gallery. That was the only word for it. A curved room with a sloped floor and a glass wall. And behind the glass, a surgical theater. And Marshall was one of a dozen prisoners made to stand and watch. He didn't understand why until the whitecoats brought in the female. She was Soric, civilian marked, like the ones from the Tarsus market, and visibly pregnant. She was calm at first. Calm like someone who believed she was about to be helped. They laid her down. They strapped the long limbs. A richly robed Soric watched from the side of the theater, not working, only observing, and made a note on a slate when the first incision went in. It went wrong the way it was designed to go wrong. They weren't trying to save anything. They were measuring. Marshall watched them measure, and watched the calm leave her in stages, and watched the moment, exact, unmissable, when the small movements under her ribs that had been steady went still. The note-taking noble made another note, adjusted something. Then the whitecoats opened her farther and carefully removed what they had come for, measuring organs, taking samples, recording every finding with quiet precision. That had been the purpose all along. Marshall made himself keep his eyes open because closing them felt like letting them do it twice. When it was over, a junior white coat hosed the theater, and the next subject was already at the door. Marshall did not move. His hands were flat against his thighs, his breathing slow and even, his eyes dry. The old gray-furred prisoner beside him glanced at the human's unnatural stillness and quietly edged away. Around here, anything unusual drew the white coat's attention. 2 sectors away, Jace was learning what the colored bands meant. He'd cracked the script by then, enough of it. The band over his own hall meant viable. The band over the next meant something close to spent. And the band over the small hall, the bright one, the one with the lower doors, meant a word that didn't carry across the translator cleanly, but landed in his gut as small. A family had come in behind his group. He'd seen them on the transport. A parent, 3 young, all the same soft-shelled species, all sent together, because on Tarsus, the whole household went when the household was condemned. The young ones had stayed close to the parent the entire ride. They were still close when the whitecoats read the slate and the band over the small hall lit, and Jace understood the sorting logic a half-second before the parent did. The young were viable for things the grown weren't. Smaller systems, faster to test, cheaper to lose. The parent made a sound Jace would carry a long way. The guards were already between them. They walked the 3 young ones toward the bright band, and they walked the parent toward viable, and the parent fought. The only one Jace had seen fight all day. And a guard marked the slate, and that was all. A mark. Jace stood with his hands open at his sides and did nothing, because there were 40 of them, and the doors were the same, and doing nothing cost him something he didn't have a name for yet. Bran's route ended at a different door. The guards marched him through without a word. The instant he crossed the threshold, something struck the side of his neck. A sharp pulse, hot and electric, with no barb and no wound. His legs vanished beneath him before he could turn. Darkness took him before he hit the floor. He woke strapped to a table with his arm and his leg gone, and the absence so total he kept trying to move them. They hadn't taken the limbs as a punishment. He worked that out fast, because the mechanic in him read the room before the rest of him caught up. The table was clean. The instruments were arranged. This was a procedure, not cruelty. There were 2 of them, a senior in deep-collared white and a junior. On a rack beside the table sat the arm and the leg they meant to give him, and they were not Sarek and not flesh. Dark metal, near black, jointed in a way Bran's eye followed with reluctant admiration even through the haze. The senior lifted the slate, said a word, Netherium, and the junior made a gesture Bran would learn meant doubt. He learned a lot in the next while by watching their body language, because they spoke in front of him the way the floor foreman spoke in front of the stock. They didn't expect him to live. That was the whole of it. The junior gestured at a readout, and then at the alloy, and the gesture said, "Why waste it?" The senior answered with a sharp motion toward Bran. Human. New. Worth the alloy. They fitted the leg first. When the alloy met the open wound and bonded, the pain took Bran somewhere white and wordless, and he came back to the senior, watching a readout with its long head very still. The readout should have climbed. Rejection had a signature, and the signature should have started. It didn't start. The senior tapped the slate, tapped it again, fitted the arm, faster now, interested, and the same wrong thing happened, which was nothing, which was Bran's body closing around the alloy like it had been waiting for it. The junior took a step back from the table. The senior did not. The senior leaned in over the human who was supposed to be dying, and was instead lying there breathing, eyes open, watching them back. And for the first time since the gate, Bran saw a Sorek look unsure. "It hurts," Brown said. His voice was wrecked. He made it work anyway, because a man who can still talk is still in the fight. Bet you've never heard one of us say that. The senior didn't understand the words. It understood the steadiness under them, and it took its own step back, and it reached for the slate to send word up the only direction that mattered. Word went up, and up was a contest. The senior reported to the research head, Sethric, and Sethric did not report it onward. He stood for a long moment with the slate in his hand, staring at the impossible survival data, while ambition quietly replaced surprise. On Kairos 9, discoveries were never just discoveries. The prison world belonged to Duke Zeran Valis, but beneath him each sector answered to a different noble house, and every house guarded its research, like treasure. Prestige rose with results. So did power. A finding like this could lift an entire house, or bury another beneath it. A spontaneous bond with untested Netherium in a species the program had never run? That was not a finding to hand a rival. That was a finding to ripen. The noble over Sethric's sector was Baron Koreth, ambitious, underfunded, and always hunting the next discovery that might lift his house a little closer to the Duke's favor. Rumor reached him before the report did. By the time Sethric finished deciding the human would remain hidden, Koreth was already walking into the laboratory. Nobles did not visit research floors without reason. "A bond," Koreth said. "I'm told there was a bond." "There was a complication," Sethric replied. "We're verifying." "Verify faster. The Duke values speed." Sethric's eyes never left the slate. "The Duke values certainty. I'd hate to present His Grace with a result that failed the second trial. That reflects poorly on the sector, and on its patron." The conversation remained courteous. The rivalry beneath it did not. If the discovery reached Duke Valis under Koreth's name, the Baron's house would rise with it. If Sethric kept control long enough to complete the work himself, the achievement would be tied to his name forever. Neither could seize the prize openly without triggering a confrontation they could not yet afford, so they fenced with careful words, while, farther down the hall, the human lay hidden beneath a deliberately falsified sample number. Above them both, Duke Zeran Valis already knew. A duke who did not know what happened inside his own sectors did not remain a duke for long, and Valis had ruled Kairos 9 long enough to understand that ambition was cheaper than obedience. He let Koreth and Sethric maneuver because their rivalry cost him nothing, and sooner or later always produced results. He had watched 100 species pass through the gates. The human anomaly was only the latest report carried to his high gallery by an aide who chose every word with care. Valis tilted his long head. He was not cruel in any way he would have recognized. He simply believed, with the full weight of generations behind him, that the universe divided naturally into those who studied and those who were studied. His family had stood on the proper side of that divide for longer than memory, and it had never occurred to him to question it. "Let them contest it," Valis said. "Bring me whichever one wins, and the human." When the day's testing ended, the survivors were herded back onto a common rest floor. The Sauric made no effort to keep species, or even test groups, separate. There was no reason to. Stock returned to the rack between uses, and what happened there was of no consequence to anyone who mattered. That was how the four found each other again. Bran came in last, walking. The Netherium leg carried him with an uneven rhythm, wrong and right at the same time, and when the others saw the black arm and matching leg, nobody spoke for a long moment. "It works," Bran said finally, sitting, careful. "That's the thing nobody will believe. It works, and it's not supposed to, and they don't know why." He flexed the dark hand. The fingers closed. "I don't know why. Yet." Collins hadn't spoken since the holding floor. He'd spent the day among the unremarkable stock, the spent ones, the long-term ones, and he'd watched the thing that broke him quietly. He said it now, low. There was a man today. Not human, but a man. You'd have called him a man. Been here years, you could tell. A guard dropped a slate near him, right at his feet. Collins looked at his own hands, and he picked it up, handed it back. Nobody made him. He just handed it back and stepped back into line. He looked up. They don't fight because they've done the math we did at the market. 20 of them. They're ground. Every day for years. Until the math is the only thing left in you, and there's no you underneath it. Nobody answered that. Marshall was looking at the middle distance with the stillness the old prisoner had edged away from. Jace's hands hadn't been right since the bright band. I watched them open one up, Marshall said. Carrying. They timed how long it took the inside one to stop. He said it flat, all the way flat, which was how they all understood how far from flat it was. It's not war to them. It's not even hate. It's inventory. Kids, Jace said. That was all. Kids, and they marked a slate. Marshall stood up. We're not getting out, he said. Let's put that down first, so nobody's carrying it. No ship, no charts, no rescue coming for 4 pirates nobody's looking for. He looked at each of them. But I'm done being inventory. And Bran's got something in his arm they can't explain, and Jace can read their doors, and Collins knows what every prisoner on this floor would do if the math ever changed. He let that sit. So we don't escape. We don't wait. We take this place apart from the inside until there's nothing left for them to study. Bran flexed the black hand again, closed it. Burn it down, he said. Burn it down, Marshall said. Collins nodded, slow. Jace last, jaw tight. 4 men. No weapons, no plan, no way out. And for the first time since the gate sealed behind them, the math had a new number in it. And that number was them. They assumed they had 3 days before the Sarek decided what to do with Bran, and they spent the time learning the building. Jace did it with his eyes. He'd been moved to a cleaning detail, low stock, low watch, and a mop bucket went anywhere. He walked the halls reading bans, red over the processing gates, amber over the spent wings, and down past a blast door that took 2 Sarek to open, a band he'd seen nowhere else, over a hall that breathed heat. He stood near it once, long enough to feel the floor warm through his boots, long enough to hear the deep industrial pulse underneath everything. He came back and drew the map in grease on the underside of a rack. Here, he said, everything routes here. Power, the alloy lines, the heat. They make the metal here. The limbs, the plating, whatever they're building. It's the engine of the whole place. He tapped the grease. And it's the one section with no prisoners in it. Just machines and a few techs. Because it's the one place they can't afford us, Marshall said. Right. Bran learned the building a different way. He learned it through his own arm. In the dark, on the rest floor, he tested the thing they'd bolted to him. The Nitherium didn't tire. He'd grip a steel rack upright and feel the metal give before the limb did. He pressed the dark hand flat to the floor and pushed, and his whole body lifted, like the arm didn't know what his weight was supposed to cost. The Sarek had built it to bond, and they'd been so amazed it bonded that nobody had measured what it could do once it had. How hard can you close it? Marshall asked him. Bran looked at the hand. Don't know yet. Harder than they think. Collins worked the prisoners. He didn't recruit. Recruiting got you marked. He watched instead. 3 days wasn't enough to build trust, but it was enough to learn who still looked at the guards instead of the floor. The 6-limbed laborer watched every patrol change. The old aquatic in the tank suit never stopped counting routes through the room. Two of the soft-shelled prisoners quietly traded places whenever inspections came, shielding the weaker of their group without drawing attention to it. Tiny things, easy to miss unless you were looking for them. Collins was. He spoke to them when no guard was close enough to care. Never about escape, never about fighting. Just enough to learn that none of them expected to leave Kairos 9 alive, and none of them intended to spend whatever time remained helping it run. Out of the whole spent floor, he found 4 with something still burning behind the eyes. 4. Out of hundreds. "That's all?" Jace asked. "That's all," Collins said. "I didn't change anyone. I just found the ones who were already waiting. The rest'll watch. They won't move until they see it can be done." He looked at Brand's arm. Maybe not even then. Marshall studied the grease map a long time. "We don't free anyone," he said. "We don't hold ground. We get to the engine and we break it so hard they can't run this place." He looked up. Bran opens the door. Jace gets us through it blind. Collins's 4 make the noise that pulls the guards the wrong way. He paused. "And then we use their own forge on them." The Sauric moved their timeline first. A white coat came for Bran a day early. Sethric wanted his sample secured before Korath forced the issue, and securing it meant a cage Bran would not be walking out of. 2 guards. The standard 2, because nobody on Kairos 9 brought more than 2 for stock. They unstrapped him from the rest rack, and that was the mistake. Bran let them get him standing. He let them turn him toward the door. Then he closed the Netherium hand around the lead guard's weapon arm and found out the answer to Marshall's question. The arm came off, not cut. Torn free. The black hand simply kept closing until the shoulder failed. The guard made a sound no prisoner on that floor had ever heard a guard make, and Bran put the dark fist through the side of its head, and the sound stopped. The second guard brought its weapon up. Bran was already inside the reach of it. He took it by the throat with the metal hand and squeezed, and the thin neck did what the steel rack had done, gave before the limb did. And then there were 2 gray shapes on the floor, and a human standing over them breathing hard with black hands. The rest floor had gone dead silent. Hundreds of prisoners. Every eye. A guard, dead. 2 guards, dead, by a thing in a prison sleeve, and the world did not end. No gas, no reprisal in the first 3 seconds, or the next 3. The machine had no answer ready because the machine had never needed one. Collins moved into that silence. "Now," he said, low, and his 4 moved with him, the 6-limbed laborer first, tearing a rack strut free, then the others. They didn't roar. They didn't free the floor. They fell in around the 4 humans and took the dead guards' weapons, and the rest of the prisoners watched them do it and didn't move, didn't join, only watched with the held breath stillness of people who'd stopped believing in any direction but down. "They're not coming," Jace said. "Didn't think they would," Marshall said. "Move." The alarm reached Sethric as a single line on a slate, and the line was wrong in a way that took him a moment to credit. Stock fatalities were logged hourly. This was not a stock fatality. This was 2 guards dead and a sample unaccounted for, and the sample number, when he checked it, was the one he had filed wrong on purpose. His concealment turned in his hand like a blade gripped at the edge. He had hidden the human to ripen it. He had hidden it so well that now, when it mattered, the containment system did not know what it was hunting. Baron Korath knew within minutes because he had paid a tech in Sethric's sector to tell him exactly this. "Your verified anomaly," Korath said, arriving where Sethric stood, "appears to be killing my guards. They're the Duke's guards. They're dying in my sector." Korath's head tilted, and the tilt was pleasure barely held. A research head conceals an unstable subject, mislabels it, and it breaks containment. That's not a finding, Sethric. That's a failure with your name filed under it. Sethric said nothing, because there was nothing to say that Baron Korith would not carry upward and sharpen. Upward, Duke Zeran Valis was already informed. He stood in his high gallery and received the report with his hands folded, and what moved across his long face was not fear. Kairos 9 had held 10,000 desperate things across 40 years and broken every one of them. He had seen subjects fight at the table. He had never seen one organize, because the gate sorted the organizers out and the place ground the rest to passivity, and that grinding was the whole genius of it. "Improvised weapons?" he asked. "Its own hands, Your Grace." "The Nitherium." Duke Valis was quiet a moment. The thing he'd permitted Korith and Sethric to squabble over was loose and using the gift they'd given it as a tool against them. And somewhere under his certainty, a very old assumption shifted by a single degree. "Seal the sector wings," he said. "Pull guards from the engine if you have to. I want it cornered, not killed. It's still the most valuable thing on this world." He paused. "And it's only one." It was the order to pull guards from the engine that opened the door. Duke Valis had created the gap himself. Jace saw it before he understood it. The heat hall ahead, the blast door that normally stood under 2 Sarek, now watched by only 1. The order to seal the sector wings had pulled the second guard away. The math had changed, exactly the way Colin said it would if it ever did. Only this time, it changed for them. "Now's the gap," Jace said. "It won't last." Bran took the door. The Nitherium hands found the door's manual release and forced it, the metal arms doing the work of 4 Sarek, and the blast door ground open onto the engine of Kairos 9. The heat hit like a wall. It was a foundry. Vast, low, roaring lines of molten alloy running in channels, from a central crucible to the molds, where the limbs and the plating were cast. Nitherium, bright and white-orange, and moving like water, that wanted to be a weapon. 3 techs inside, and the soft-shelled prisoners and the 6-limbed laborer fell on them before they could reach an alarm. Bran stood in the heat and looked at the crucible and the channels and the heavy manual sluices that steered the pour, and the mechanic in him read the whole system in one breath. He didn't need it explained. It was a forge. He'd worked forges his whole life. The only difference was what came out of this one. "They've been pouring this stuff into us. Now we pour it into them." Beneath the foundry floor, directly under one of the runoff grates, sat the sector's guard station. The molten alloy flowed through channels overhead before feeding the casting molds. Jace read the grating layout off the wall in 3 seconds. Marshall saw what Bran saw. "Do it," Marshall said. Bran put both Nitherium hands on the manual sluice, the one a crew of techs was meant to turn slowly, with care, with respect for what it moved, and he turned it all the way. Fast, the way no one was ever supposed to. The sluice opened. Molten Nitherium left its course and found the grating and went through it, a falling rope of liquid metal pouring down into the station below, and the sound that came up was the sound of the place's own weapon used against the things that built it. The first pour. Starship alloy into a Sarek position, exactly as no prisoner in 40 years had ever managed, because no prisoner in 40 years had been a mechanic with hands that didn't burn. The foundry alarms finally caught up and began to scream. "That's it," Marshall said. "That's the wound. Out, before they wall us in." They went, the handful of them, back into the sealed halls of a prison that for the first time in its existence was on fire from the inside. While Kairos 9 burned from within, hidden beneath the shadow of its outer moon, a directorate cutter sat cold and silent, cloaked against the prison world's sensors. Captain Nick Carter had followed a jump signature past the veil into a system that wasn't on any directorate chart, and he had found a freighter abandoned on a gray market world with 16 crates of stolen processors still strapped in the hold and no crew anywhere. A smuggler did not leave 640 million behind. That had bothered him enough to keep going, quiet, running silent, until the uncharted world resolved on his sensors, and he understood what he was looking at. He had been watching Kairos 9 for 36 hours. He'd logged the transports. Dozens of species walked up the ramps and none came down. He'd logged the orbital defenses, heavy, layered, more than a prison needed, and exactly what a secret needed. And an hour ago he'd logged a heat bloom deep in the facility, an industrial signature spiking hard, and alarm traffic across Sauric channels his computer was only beginning to break. He didn't have all the pieces, but he had enough. Captain Nick Carter opened a tight beam channel, encrypted, aimed back across the veil toward Directorate space, toward the one man whose authority reached far enough to do something about what he was seeing. "This is Carter, Interdiction Wing, transmitting from beyond the veil line. Priority absolute." He kept his voice flat, the way he'd kept it flat ordering a freighter to cut its drive a week ago, before any of this. "I tracked the stolen cargo to an unsurveyed system. There's a facility here, alien, industrial scale. They're bringing in sentience by the shipload, every species but ours, as far as I can tell. And they are not bringing them back out." He looked at the heat bloom still burning on his screen. "And General, I think we've got humans down there. The crew I was chasing. Their ship's abandoned on the surface, and something inside that facility just started fighting back." A pause. "Requesting orders." The message folded into the dark, bound first for the nearest Directorate relay, 11 light minutes away, then onward, through jump relays toward General William Joseph, who had not yet heard the word that would turn a pirate hunt into a war. The prison answered. The pour was still cooling in the guard station below when the corridor behind them filled with Sauric. Marshall counted them in the half-second before the blast door ground shut. 8, maybe 10. Weapons up, advancing in the tight wedge of the hunt and seal order. The same order that had opened the forge now threatened to seal it again. The crew had a sealed hull at their backs, scavenged Sauric weapons in their hands, and a foundry alarm shrieking through the prison loud enough to rattle their teeth. "Back," Marshall said. "Through the cast room. Move." They moved. Bran went last, because Bran was the one who could afford to. A weapon bolt caught him high in the shoulder, and the Netherium beneath his skin absorbed the bolt and flung the energy sideways in a spray of sparks, leaving the flesh beneath untouched. He grunted, more surprise than pain, and reached back with the black hand and closed it on a wall conduit and tore the whole length of it free. He swung it through the first two Sauric, coming through the door the way a man clears brush, and they went down folded wrong, and he backed into the cast room after the others, with the conduit dragging sparks behind him. Varuna went the other way. The aquatic alien moved with a slow, enormous certainty that had nothing to do with speed. He filled half the corridor in his pressurized tank suit, water sloshing gray behind a faceplate, cracked and resealed a dozen times over the years, and he caught a Sauric that had slipped wide to flank Bran and simply folded it against the wall with two heavy forelimbs. He held it there. He did not rush. He kept it pinned while it hammered at the suit and found nothing it could damage. The blows grew weaker. Then they stopped altogether. Only after the body went limp did he let it slide down the wall and turn his huge head toward Bran. A sound came out of the suit's external speaker, low and bubbling and patient, run through whatever translator the Sauric had bolted to his tank decades ago. "Long time," Varuna said, "since one of them bled where I could watch." "There's plenty more where that came from," Bran said. "Good." The water shifted behind the faceplate, something that might have been satisfaction. "Save me some." Hask hit the rest of the Sorek line like a slope giving way. 6 limbs, a torn rack strut gripped in 2 of them, and the laborer drove into them with the flat indifference of a thing that had hauled loads heavier than a grown man every day of a life, measured only by what it could carry. A bolt scored across his broad back and burned a black line through the hide, and he didn't slow for it. He didn't seem to notice it. He took the strut through the last standing guard and stood there in the wreckage, breathing hard, 6 limbs splayed. Then he looked back at the humans almost shyly, as though waiting to be told he'd done it right. Then it was quiet, or as quiet as the alarm let it be, and it was only the 8 of them, 4 humans, the giant, the laborer, and 2 soft-shelled prisoners pressed flat against the cast room wall, alone in a prison that now knew exactly where they were and exactly what they'd done to it. Jace wiped grease and somebody's blood off the door panel and got it sealed behind them. "They'll wall the whole sector now," he said. "That's the move. Trap us in the bottom, cut the power, cut the air, starve it out slow. They don't even have to come in after us. They just have to wait." "Then waiting's their mistake," Marshall said. He looked around the cast room, at the dead Sorek, at the cooling channels, at the 7 living things still on their feet. "We sit down here, and they grind us out in a day. Quiet. Nobody up top ever knows it happened." He shook his head. "Or we open every door in this place and hand them 10,000 problems instead of 7. Collins was already nodding. Slow. "They won't move on their own. I told you that. Every one of them did the same math we did at the market every day for years, till there was nothing under it but the math." He looked toward the sealed door, toward the dark of the lower blocks beyond it. "But they'll move if you show them it can be done. They have to see it. With their own eyes." "Then we show them," Marshall said, "loud enough that the whole bottom of this prison sees it at once." They started with 1. Jace cracked the holding block that backed onto the cast room. A long, low gallery packed with the spent stock. The broken ones, hundreds of them behind a single control door. He opened in 11 seconds flat with a dead guard slate and a string of Sorek code he'd been quietly memorizing since his first day on the cleaning detail. The door rolled back on its track. The prisoners inside looked through the gap at the humans standing there, then at the 2 dead Sorek cooling on the floor. And they didn't move. They'd been taught not to, and the teaching had taken. Years of tones and marks and walks down the bright hall had pressed it into them past the place where courage lives. Marshall didn't try a speech. He didn't have one, and he wouldn't have trusted his own mouth with it if he had. He walked into the block instead, bent, picked up a fallen Sorek weapon off the floor, and held it out. Not to the crowd, which would have meant nothing, but to one of them. A lean, scarred prisoner near the front, some upright reptile thing whose eyes had followed the weapon from the second the door opened and hadn't left it since. "You already know how they bleed," Marshall said. "You've been smelling it your whole time in here. You want to make some of it yourself?" The prisoner looked at the weapon, looked past it at the 2 dead guards, looked, longest of all, at the open door behind the humans. Open, actually rolled back and standing open. The one thing none of them in that block had seen in years and had stopped letting themselves want. It took the weapon out of Marshall's hand. That was the crack. One scarred grip closing around one Sorek rifle, and the whole block seemed to breathe out at once and then breathe in something new. 10 more surged for the dead guard's gear, then 30. The held-breath stillness that had ruled the place broke apart into noise and motion, prisoners pulling weapons and restraints and anything that could be swung, the dam not bursting but cracking wide and letting through a flood that had been building behind it for a very long time. But not all of them came. That was the part Collins watched. A whole corner of the block stayed pressed to the back wall and did not move toward the open door. An older prisoner held that corner, an aging, four-armed thing with two younger ones tucked behind the span of its arms, and it watched the others arming themselves with naked dread on its face. When Collins caught its eye across the block, it shook its head. Slow, certain, final. It had seen reprisal. It had been here long enough to have watched a sector resist once before, and to have seen, afterward, what Kairos 9 did to a sector that resisted. It wanted no part of standing on the floor with a weapon in its hands when the Sarek came back through that door, and it believed, with the full weight of everything it had survived, that the Sarek would come back. Collins held the look a moment longer. Then he nodded, once, and let it go. "Leave them," Marshall said, low at his shoulder. "Everybody here gets to choose. That's the whole point of opening the door. They chose." "I know." But Collins looked back once more at the two young ones behind the old one's arms before following the others. The rest of the block poured out past them into the hall, armed and shouting and decades overdue, and the rising stopped. Being 4 pirates and a handful of allies, and became, for the first time, a thing with its own weight and its own momentum. They went up through the lower sectors after that like water, finding every crack in a wall. Jace ran the doors, reading the colored bands off the corridor signage, and the bands told a different story now that they were inside the machine instead of being fed through it. Halfway up, they passed a wing in clinical white, the same white as the theater glass Marshall had stood behind in the dark, watching them measure how long it took a thing to stop, and the doors along it carried the bright band Jace had marked his very first day. He didn't need to crack the rest of the script to read what stood behind the glass. The air smelled of antiseptic, hot alloy, and the sweet chemical tang of preservation fluid. Tanks. Long rows of them, lit from beneath. Subjects suspended mid-process in fluid, a dozen species and more, several of them caught half-finished, dark alloy grafted where a limb had been cut away, plating fused to scaled hide, the whole brutal procedure abandoned in place when the alarms pulled the technicians out at a run. A results board filled the far wall, columns of Sarek figures stacked under specimen tags, the cold accounting of 100 captured species rendered down into compatibility scores and rejection rates and times to death. Collins stopped in front of the glass for 1 second too long. "That's what they were doing to all of them," Collins said. "Not just Bran. Every door in this place. Every species." "And we're the only line on that board that held," Bran said. He turned the black hand over and looked at it in the white light. "Everything else up there rejected and died. That's why they want me breathing. I'm the only result they've got that worked." Marshall looked once at the wall of specimen numbers. "You're the prize," he said quietly. "No wonder the whole prison came after you." Bran let the hand drop. "So when this is over, that board burns with the rest of it." "Let's keep moving so there isn't over," Marshall said, pulling them on. "The sector armory's 2 halls up. Jace had it on the map. We take that. We stop fighting with dead men's scraps and start fighting with theirs." The armory was where luck ended. A squad held the control point in front of it, dug in behind hard cover, and these did not break the way the floor guards had broken. These were soldiers, not orderlies, drilled, disciplined, unbothered by the screaming and the smoke, and they put down a dozen prisoners in the open approach before the rebels closed half the distance. The freed stock had courage now and almost no idea how to use it, and they paid the full price for that. Body after body in the corridor. One of the 2 soft-shelled prisoners who'd been with the crew since the transport went down fell in the open and did not get back up. There was no time to do anything about it, but step past. It was Varuna who broke the line. The old aquatic walked out into the open and into the full weight of the Sauric fire, bolts cracking and skating off the tank suit, scoring the metal, starring the faceplate. And he didn't stop. He drew every gun in the squad onto himself by the simple fact of being too big and too slow to ignore. And while they emptied themselves into him, the humans went wide along both walls. He reached the control point with his suit smoking and brought his entire enormous weight straight down onto it. The impact opened a gap, and Hask came through low and fast, and between the giant who would not fall and the laborer who would not stop, the squad was finished in under a minute. Then the armory was theirs. Racks of real Sauric weapons, charge cells, breaching gear, the whole arsenal of the lower prison passing hand to hand into the grip of the Rising. After that, it went the way Collins had always said it would once they believed. Sector by sector, door by door, the freed prisoners spread through the lower half of the facility, and by the time the Sauric pulled back hard and slammed the upper level sealed, the entire bottom of Kairos 9 belonged to the rebellion. A real foothold, taken by their own hands, paid for. Varuna stood in the captured armory with gray water bubbling slow behind his ruined faceplate, and looked at the racks of weapons and the open doors and the prisoners moving free through halls that had held them like stock an hour before. "I waited a long time for this," he said. "Longer than the four of you have been alive, I'd wager. Long enough I stopped marking it." He lifted a Sauric rifle in one heavy forelimb, as though testing the weight of the whole moment. Turns out it was worth the wait. Hask laughed, a wet, broken, delighted sound from somewhere deep in the six-limbed chest, and clapped a limb against the giant's suit, leaving a bloody print across the metal, and the two of them stood there, grinning in the wreckage as though it meant something. It did. High above them, in his gallery, Duke Zoran Valis had stopped watching the sorting floors. He stood in front of a schematic of his own facility instead, and a full third of it had gone red, and the red was climbing. "It's contained," Sethric said, fast. "Only the lower sectors are compromised, Your Grace. The upper levels are sealed. The forge controls are behind hard doors. They have nowhere left, too. They hold the lower armory." Baron Korath had come uninvited again, and the tilt of his long head carried something far sharper than the pleasure he'd worn before. "They have real weapons now, Sethric. Ordnance. The stock you personally assured His Grace was broken beyond use is holding an entire third of his world at gunpoint. He let that settle. And how is your concealed anomaly, the unlabeled one, the human that began all of this?" Sethric said nothing. The blade he had held so carefully by its edge in the early days was buried to the grip in his own foot now, and every noble in the room could see it. Duke Valis did not enter the squabble. He stood very still and did the harder work of recalculating 40 years of certainty in the space of a breath. The houses would turn on each other soon enough, for tonight they would fall into line, because a duke at war was still a duke. "This is not a containment problem," he said, and the room went quiet around him. "Containment is what one does to stock. Stock does not seize an armory. Stock does not coordinate, or hold ground, or choose its targets." He turned from the schematic. "What is below us is a war. We will have the decency to call it that, and to fight it as one." His gaze moved to Korath, then to Sethric, unhurried, and made plain that he had weighed exactly what each of their ambitions had cost him tonight. Seal the forge controls, reinforce every command level, strip the outer wings, pull the guards in, and hold the upper prison like the fortress it was built to be. A pause. "And the human carrying the Netherium is to be taken alive, whatever else burns, Everything else on this world is now expendable. That one is not. Far out, in the cold dark behind the outer moon, the Directorate cutter held its silent watch. The message it had folded into the void had already reached human space. General William Joseph read it twice. It was thin, and that was the worst of it. Carter was not a man given to speculation. He was methodical, intelligent, and stubborn enough to stay with a problem long after anyone else would have written it off. If he put something in a report, it was because he'd exhausted every other explanation first, which, here, amounted to almost nothing. An uncharted system passed the Veil line, a facility of industrial scale on a world that appeared on no chart. Transports arriving full of sentience of many species and departing empty. A heat bloom deep in the structure and a spike of alien alarm traffic that suggested, in Carter's deliberately cautious phrasing, that something inside had begun to fight. And one unconfirmed possibility hung on a single abandoned freighter sitting on the surface, that there were humans down there somewhere in the dark. That was the whole of it. No numbers, no layout, no count of the enemy, no map of the ground, no eyes inside the walls. A sealed black box beyond the edge of every chart the Directorate held, with screaming leaking out of the seams. Joseph set the message down on the desk. A few days ago, this had been a cargo theft, 16 crates of stolen processors, and a pirate crew not worth the fuel to chase. Now it was a few words he found he could not unread, sitting at the bottom of Carter's careful report. They do not return them. Attached to a place no human had been meant to find, and apparently could not now afford to ignore. "Wake the 9th, he said. "Full deployment. Combat readiness. All elements." "Sir." Joseph was already on his feet and moving. "Carter went in blind and chose to stay. We can manage the same." He stopped at the threshold. "If there are people of ours inside that place, then we are already late, and every hour we spend looking for better maps makes us later." "Move." "Yes, sir." The order went out down the line. Across the docks, the 9th began to wake, engines flaring to life one after another in the dark. Far ahead of them, beyond the veil and beyond every chart, a prison burned from the bottom up, while the men coming to save it knew almost nothing about what they were flying into. They tried the front door first because they had to know. Marshall sent the push up the main spine of the prison an hour after the lower sectors went quiet. 100 armed prisoners, the best of the freed stock, formed the column. Hask and the upright reptile thing from the holding block led the way, with the crew spread through the middle. They moved fast, and they moved confident, because confidence was what the lower prison had taught them in a single afternoon, and they carried that confidence straight into the teeth of what the Sauric had built up top. It did not go the way the lower sectors had gone. The first sealed checkpoint opened the moment they reached it, not because Jace cracked it, but because the Sauric wanted it open. The corridor beyond was a kill box, long and straight and bare, and the guards holding the far end were not orderlies with stun poles. They were soldiers behind hard cover with crew-served weapons, and they let the first rank of prisoners get 40 meters in before they fired. The front of the column came apart. The reptile thing that had taken the first weapon from Marshall's hand in the holding block went down in the opening volley and did not get up, and a dozen more went down around it, and the corridor that had looked like a door turned out to be a trap with the Sauric patience behind it. Hask dragged 2 wounded prisoners back by their collars with his rear limbs, while the rest of them broke and ran, and the checkpoint sealed again behind the retreat, and the spine of the prison was exactly as Sauric as it had been that morning. They regrouped 2 sectors down, in the captured armory, and counted what the front door had cost. 18, Collins said. 18 dead for a road we can't use. Then we stopped trying to use it, Marshall said. He was looking at Jace's grease map, redrawn larger now on the armory wall. We don't have the bodies to walk up that spine. Every checkpoint up there is a kill box, and they've got the high ground and the hard guns. We push that way. We feed them the whole rebellion a corridor at a time, and they thank us for it. He set his palm flat on the lower levels, the red of them, the part they held. So we don't push that way. There's no other way up, one of the freed prisoners said. There's never been another way up. The spine is the only route to the command levels. Everyone knows that. Everyone who got told that by the people who built the place. Marshall looked at Jace. I don't want the route they show prisoners. I want the route they use themselves. Find me their doors. Jace was already pulling a Sauric slate out of his jacket. A good one, an officer's, pried off the dead squad leader at the armory. Give me a few hours with this, he said. If there's another way through this prison, I'll find it. Until then, stay off the spine. Jace found the doors. He found a great deal more than the doors. He spent 3 hours in a maintenance alcove with the officer's slate and 3 dead guards' access tokens, and the slow, patient work that was the only kind of fighting he was truly built for. He discovered that the Sauric network was not one network. Kairos 9 ran on a dozen overlapping systems, one for each noble sector, and they did not talk to each other. They were not designed to talk to each other. Each house kept its own access, its own supply manifests, its own security overrides, walled off from the others, not against the prisoners, who were never supposed to touch a slate, but against each other. They've got no shared security, Jace said, when he pulled the crew in close to show them. None. Sethric's sector can't see into Korath's. Korath's can't override Sethric's. They built it that way on purpose so neither one could steal the other's work. He tapped through 3 layers of a manifest. Which means there's no master lockdown. There's no single key. Every sector's a separate fortress with a separate door, and the gaps between those fortresses. He pulled up a service map, a spider's web of maintenance routes nobody had bothered to wall because no house owned them. The gaps are unguarded. Nobody secured the seams because nobody could agree whose job it was. So you can get us up through the seams, Marshall said. I can get us up through the seams, he confirmed. It was while he was mapping those seams that he found the archive. It was Sethric's, buried in the research sector's own walled system, the part Sethric had hidden so thoroughly from Korath that he'd hidden it from his own Duke's oversight too. Jace went into it sideways, through a maintenance handshake that was never meant to carry data, and what came back stopped him for a moment in the dark of the alcove. It was a directory, a long one, facility designations, each with a number, each with a status line. Kairos 9 was one entry on a list, and the list ran down past the edge of the slate's first screen. The oldest dates were centuries old. Project Ascension was not one prison's work. It was a Sauric institution, funded by houses that smiled across the same tables and sharpened knives under them. Valis had his world. Korath had his sector. Sethric had money, contacts, and enough private machinery to make nobles treat him like one of their own. They all fed the same ambition, an obedient army carrying Netherium in its bones, soldiers strong enough to carry Sauric rule beyond the worlds they already owned. But the cooperation was a lie. Every house wanted the breakthrough first. Whoever controlled Ascension would not just win favor. They would rise over the others, over the Count's house itself, and make the rest of the Sauric kneel. And there was a flag on the human line. Recent. Priority. A short string of Sauric notation that Jace had learned well enough by now to read, and it said, in the cold shorthand of the research that had taken Bran's arm, full compatibility, no rejection. First recorded. Escalate to house priority. Bran, Jace said quietly. He showed him the line. It's not just that you didn't die. You're the first thing on a list centuries long that held. Every species they've ever run rejected the alloy except us. He let that sit. That's the flag. That's why Valis won't trade you for anything. Humanity isn't just another result to them. We're the result, the one they've been looking for. Bran looked at the line a long moment, his black hand resting on the slate's edge. Then they're going to want a lot more of us, he said. Not just me. All of us. Humanity. His eyes stayed on the slate. We're not the end of that list. We're the key to making the rest of it work. He closed the dark hand. We don't just break this place. We make sure that list never gets to the next name. One world at a time, Marshall said. This one first. Jace, find us a way up. 3 hours of Jace's work meant they moved as ghosts. The maintenance routes between the houses' sectors were dark and unwatched, and the crew went up through them in small teams, while the freed prisoners made noise on the spine. Not an assault this time. A feint, enough fire, and shouting at the kill box checkpoints to keep the Sauric soldiers facing down, while the real strike climbed up behind their own walls. And as they climbed, they used the thing Jace had handed them, which was better than any weapon in the captured armory. They used the houses against each other. Jace, riding Sethric's own walled system from the inside, redirected an automated supply train, a heavy automated hauler loaded with charge cells and reactor coolant, bound for Korath's sector, and rerouted it through a junction logged under Sethric's authority. When Korath's people found their supplies gone, the record showed Sethric's hand on the diversion, plain as a signature, because it had been Sethric's system that moved it. It was not sabotage the humans had invented. It was a theft Korath already half believed Sethric capable of, because Sethric had been hiding things from him for weeks, and the moment the evidence appeared, it confirmed everything the Baron already suspected. That was the whole art of it. Jace didn't manufacture the hatred. He just handed it proof. Korath's sector locked its doors against Sethric's. 2 houses that should have been holding one wall against the Rising turned and put half their guns on each other instead, each certain the other was looting them while the prison burned. Korath stripped the relay to reinforce the boundaries of his sector. Certain Sethric's people were already moving against him. And in the seam between those 2 suddenly hostile fortresses, where the guards had been pulled to face inward at a rival instead of downward at the prisoners, the crew came up out of the maintenance dark and took a command relay that had been held by 40 Sauric that morning and was held by only 12 by the time they reached it. The 12 Sauric fought hard. Hask took a bolt through one of his lower limbs and kept moving on the other 5. Varuna walked the front again, drawing the guns, his tank suit starred and smoking, and the relay fell, and the rebels stood inside a command node 2 levels above where any prisoner of Kairos 9 had ever stood and lived. It was a war fought with a stolen manifest and a maintenance map, and it worked because the Sauric had built their own house with no shared roof. Duke Zeran Valis understood what was happening to him before either of his subordinates did. He stood in his high command with the schematic in front of him, and he watched Korath's sector and Sethric's sector light up red along the border they shared. Not the red of the Rising, the red of 2 of his own houses firing on each other, and he did not waste a moment's anger on it. Anger was for nobles, who thought the universe owed them a fair fight. Valis had presided over Kairos 9 for 40 years, precisely because he had never once believed that. "They've turned us against ourselves," he said. The aide beside him went still. The prisoners, the clever one in their network. He found the seams and turned the Sauric houses against one another. And now, Baron Korath and Sethric are spending their guns on a grudge, while the stock walks up through the gap between them. He watched the relay node go red, taken, lost, his, and felt the shape of the defeat forming, and did not flinch from it. This world is going to fall. The aide started to protest. Valis lifted a hand, and the protest died. Not today. Not this hour. But it is going to fall, and a duke who cannot see that coming is a duke who dies in his own command, waiting for reinforcements that his rivals will make certain never arrive. He turned from the schematic. Which means the question is no longer how I hold Kairos 9. The question is what I take with me when it is gone. He gave the orders quietly, and he gave them only to the aides from the smaller houses sworn to his own, the ones Koreth and Sethric could not hear. A ship, not the garrison fleet, but his own house courier, the fast vessel he reserved for private travel when a duke preferred not to arrive with an escort. The research corps, not the whole archive, only the human line, the centuries-long list, and the one flag at the bottom of it that made the whole institution worth continuing. The compatibility data, the blueprint, everything that mattered about why a human arm and a human leg had accepted untested Netherium and lived when 10,000 others had rotted off the bone. He did not announce it. He did not tell Koreth or Sethric, who were still firing on each other's sectors, and would keep firing usefully, drawing the rebellion's eye while he prepared. He simply began in the calm, methodical way of a creature that had decided to lose a battle in order to keep a war, to pack the only cargo that had ever been the point. The prison would burn. Valis intended to be somewhere else, with the future in his hold, when it did. In the captured relay node, in the lull while Jace mapped the next seam upward, Varuna sat down for the first time anyone could remember. The tank suit wasn't built for sitting. He folded into a corner anyway, the water inside him settling, and he watched the freed prisoners move through a command node their kind had never been allowed to see. Bron sat near him, working grease into the joint of his Netherium arm, where the bolt scoring had stiffened it. "You're going to win this," Varuna said. It wasn't a question. "I've been here long enough to know the difference between a riot and a war, and this is the second one." The water shifted slow behind the cracked faceplate. "I didn't think I'd see it. I stopped thinking I'd see anything but that ceiling." He was quiet a moment. "I had a sea once, a whole sea. They took me off a transport, like the one that brought you, and I never saw open water again. This suit's the most of it I've had in." He made the bubbling sound that passed for a laugh. "I stopped counting. I told you that. I really did stop counting." "You'll see water again," Bran said. "Maybe." Varuna didn't sound like he believed it, but he didn't sound bitter either. He sounded like something very old and very tired that had found at the end one thing worth being awake for. "Doesn't matter much. I got to watch them bleed. I got to help. That's more than I'd asked the universe for in a long time." He lifted one heavy forelimb and looked at it. "Funny what's enough when you've had nothing for long enough." Across the node, Hask was doing something quieter and stranger. The laborer had found one of the soft-shelled prisoners young, a small one, separated in the chaos, frightened of every shape in the room, including the enormous six-limbed thing that approached it. Hask sat down a careful distance away. He didn't reach for it. He just lowered himself until he was smaller than it, somehow, all six limbs tucked, and he made a low rumbling sound in his chest, the same sound over and over, until the small one stopped shaking. Then he nudged a ration block across the floor to it with one limb and looked away, as though giving it privacy to decide whether to trust him. Varuna watched him for a long moment. 40 years he hauled whatever they put in front of him, the old aquatic said quietly. That's all the Sauric ever saw when they looked at him. The strongest, back on the floor. He made the soft, bubbling sound that passed for a sigh. They never thought to ask what else he might be. Marshall watched Hask waiting patiently for the frightened child to choose. They wrote down the wrong thing about all of them, he said. The relay node settled into the uneasy quiet that followed the fighting. Around them, freed prisoners carried the wounded, gathered weapons, and secured the last corners of the command post, while Jace kept working. The seams continued to unfold across his slate, the path to the forge controls resolving out of the dark. By the time the relay node was fully secured, the way forward had opened. Jace laid it out on the slate for all of them. The seam they'd ridden up, the border where Korath and Sethric were still burning each other's sectors, and beyond it, past one more stretch of unguarded maintenance dark, two objectives sitting almost side by side. The forge controls, where the molten Netherium of the whole facility was steered and poured. And past those, behind the heaviest doors left in the prison, the command bunker. Duke Valis. The houses are still shooting at each other, Jace said. Baron Korath thinks Sethric robbed him. Sethric thinks Korath's making a play for his research. Neither one's looking down anymore. They're looking at each other. That's our window, and it's open right now. He looked up, but it won't stay open. The second Valis forces them back in line. That seam closes, and we're back to throwing bodies at a kill box. Then we don't wait for him to do that. Marshall looked at the two objectives on the slate, the forge, the bunker, side by side, the whole back half of the story sitting one dark corridor away. We take the forge controls. We turn their own pour on their own command, and we end this before the Duke gets his houses pointing the right direction again. And Valis? Collins asked. Marshall looked at the bunker on the slate, at the heavy doors, at the one Soric who hadn't panicked in any of this. Valis is behind the last door in the place, he said. So we go through everything else first, and then we go through him. None of them knew that 2 levels up, in the quiet of his command, the Duke had already fueled a courier and begun loading the one thing worth carrying off a dying world. And that the last door in the prison was a door he had no intention of being behind when they reached it. The forge controls sat behind a blast door that had never been built to keep prisoners out, because no one who designed Kairos 9 had ever imagined prisoners getting this far. It had been built to keep the houses out of each other's work. The forge sector answered only to its own walled system, and its master had already pulled half his guards to go shoot at Korath over a supply train that had never been stolen. What remained was a skeleton crew, and the rebels came up through the maintenance dark and hit it with everything the lower armory had given them. It was still a fight. The Soric, holding the control room, were technicians with weapons, not soldiers, but a technician with a wall at his back and a crew-served gun fires it just as hard. And the approach was a narrow gallery with no cover, and the rebels paid the toll going in. Hask paid the most of it. The laborer went first through the gallery, the way he always went first, 6 limbs and a torn sheet of armory plating held up in front of him like a shield, drawing the gun so the prisoners behind him could close. The plating held for most of the gallery. It didn't hold all of it. A sustained burst found the seam where 2 of his limbs met his body and went through, and Hask went down hard in the middle of the open gallery, with the gun still tracking him, and for a moment it looked like the end of him. Varuna walked out into the fire and stood over him. The old aquatic put his own enormous body between the gun and the fallen laborer, and let the burst hammer into the tank suit, starring it, cracking it further. While every eye stayed on the giant, Bronn exploded out of the smoke. The Netherium leg hit the deck like a piston, launching him the length of the gallery, before the technicians realized the giant wasn't the real threat. The black hand caught the crew-served weapon as it swung toward him, tore it free from its mount, and drove it through the firing position like a battering ram. By the time Marshall and Collins reached the position, there was nothing left to clear. Hask was alive, badly, 2 limbs ruined, bleeding into the gallery floor, but alive and conscious and swearing in his own language, and Varuna was helping drag him back with the others, his suit hissing now from a dozen small breaches it hadn't had that morning. "Stay down," Bran told Hask, crouching over him, jamming a field seal into the worst of the wounds. "You're done. You held the door. That's enough. I can still." Hask tried to get a limb under himself. "You can't. And you don't have to." Bran pressed him flat. "You did your part. Let us do the rest." The control room was theirs. Bran stood up in the middle of it and looked at the forge laid out below the gallery glass. The crucible, the channels, the heavy manual sluices, the molten heart of Kairos 9. Then he looked at the schematic on the wall and traced one of the armored casting channels that ran toward the command levels. The command bunker sat at the end of it, built to receive molten Netherium from the forge whenever the upper foundries called for a pour. He began to understand exactly what the controls in his hands could do. The plan was simple. Carrying it out would cost them. The bunker assault was the worst fighting of the whole rebellion, because it was the only fighting the Sarek had truly prepared for. Everything below had been improvisation, guards meant for stock, suddenly facing a war. But the command levels were built to be held. The rebels threw themselves at it sector by sector, and the command levels made them bleed for every meter. And the house war that had cracked the prison open began, at last, to close. And it closed badly for the two who had started it. Sethric died alone, which was the only way a creature like Sethric could have died. When the rebels broke into his research sector, he called for reinforcements over his own walled network. No other house heard him. Koreth's forces, only 2 corridors away, never got the call, and would not have answered it if they had. Sethric had spent years making sure no one else could reach his work. In the end, no one could reach him. With Sethric's sector collapsing, the Baron saw, even now, even with the prison burning down around all of them, an opening. Sethric's research was unguarded. The discoveries Sethric had hoarded for weeks were sitting there for the taking, and the prestige of presenting them to the Duke, of finally having the thing his rival had denied him, was worth more to Koreth than the wall he was supposed to be holding. He pulled his own troops off the command-level defense to seize a dead rival's prizes, and the rebels drove straight through the gap he left behind. Baron Koreth died in Sethric's research bay, reaching for a slate full of data he'd wanted his whole career, while the rebellion poured through the breach his ambition had opened. The two of them ended a few meters apart, secrecy and ambition, both undone by the exact thing that had defined them. The last Sarek defensive line gave way, and the command bunker lay at the end of one final corridor. 2 levels above, in the forge controls, Bran watched the channel on his schematic clear all the way to Valis' seat. "We're through," Marshall's voice came up over the scavenged Sarek comms, ragged, close. "Bunker's 1 corridor out. Whatever you're doing up there, Bran, do it now, before they plug this hole." Bran put his black hand on the heavy manual sluice. He didn't rush. The Sarek had spent centuries measuring strength, endurance, and compatibility, but they'd never understood the thing that mattered most. A human with his hands on a machine slows down at exactly the moment everything tells him to hurry. Bran read the pour one last time. The crucible was full. The channel was clear, running straight to the command bunker, where Duke Zoran Valis had ruled Kairos 9 for 40 years, and where the orders had come from that put a pregnant female on a table, 3 children behind a bright door, and untested Netherium into Bran's own body to see if it would kill him. The forge had been built to make weapons out of prisoners. He was about to make a weapon out of the forge. "Bran," Varuna's voice behind him, bubbling and slow. The old aquatic had come up to the control room, his cracked suit hissing, and he was looking through the gallery glass at something the cameras showed. Sarek soldiers. A counterattack. moving up the maintenance seam the rebels had climbed, coming to retake the controls before the pour could happen. "A dozen of them. They're coming fast. They're going to reach you before you can open it. Somebody has to hold the gallery." "Varuna. I told you about my sea." The water shifted behind the ruined faceplate, calm, settled. I stopped counting the years after they took it from me. One heavy forelimb lifted, almost gentle, and pushed Bran back toward the sluice. "Pour your metal, mechanic. I'll get you the time." He went out into the gallery alone. The Sauric counterattack came up the seam and found the old aquatic waiting in the narrow mouth of it, too big to flank, too slow to ever retreat, and it did not matter that his suit was failing because he had no intention of using it again after this. He met them in the gallery. He filled it. The breaches in his tank suit wept and then poured, and the air that was killing him was an air he had stopped needing to care about, and he held the only door that mattered with the patience of a creature that had waited longer than the 4 pirates had been alive for exactly this. For one moment, where his size and his hate and his long endurance were finally, completely enough. Behind him, Bran opened the sluice all the way. The channel took the molten Ethereum and ran it bright and white-orange toward the command levels, the same alloy the Sauric had poured into 100 species to see which would survive it. This time, it poured into the heart of Sauric command. The fortress, 40 years of rule. The forge took all of it, the way it had been quietly taking prisoners for centuries. Except this time, it took the ones who'd been doing the pouring. The bunker did not survive it. In the gallery, the last of Varuna's water ran out onto the floor, and the old aquatic who had bought the moment did not see it land. But he'd seen the metal move. He'd seen it go. That was the thing he'd asked the universe for, and at the very end, the universe had not been able to find a reason to refuse him. For a moment, nobody on Kairos 9 did anything at all. The alarms had stopped. There was nothing left in the command levels to sound them. The fighting had stopped because the thing the Sauric had been defending was gone, and a soldier with nothing behind him to protect is just a creature deciding whether to live. Across the lower prison and up through the broken sectors, the rebellion stood still and listened to a silence none of them had ever heard in this place, the silence of a machine that had finally stopped running. They had done it. The prisoners of Kairos 9 had taken Kairos 9. In the control room, Marshall came up through the wreckage and found Bronn still standing at the sluice with his hands resting on the lever. The two of them looked at each other and didn't say anything because there wasn't a word built for it. Across the prison, the freed prisoners came out into the open halls. Some wept, others simply stood, learning the shape of a thing they had stopped letting themselves want. Even the old 4-armed prisoner who had refused to rise stepped out at last, his young beside him, and looked around without fear for the first time. They'd won. For one quiet minute, they let themselves feel it. Then Jace came up from the lower command relay with a slate in his hand, and his face wrong. "The bunker's empty," he said. I pulled the internal feeds before the pour hit. Valise wasn't there. He left an hour ago. He turned the slate so Marshall could see. An empty docking bay. Open bay. Doors. The Duke had a ship waiting while the houses were still shooting at each other. Jace's jaw tightened. I traced the archive transfer. He got the research core, the human compatibility data, the Nitherium results, the facility list. Marshall looked from the empty docking bay to the channel of cooling alloy that had poured into a bunker the Duke had already abandoned. "He let us take it," he said quietly. The prison was already lost. The only thing he ever meant to save was the research. Collins looked at him. "We won." It wasn't quite a question. "We won here," Marshall said. He looked toward the upper docks, toward the dark the courier had vanished into. He never meant Kairos 9 to be the only one. The 9th came down out of that same dark 11 hours later and found a war already over. General William Joseph had brought a fleet expecting to fight through orbital defenses and storm a fortress. And the orbital defenses were dead, and the fortress was a smoking ruin held by a few thousand freed prisoners of 40 different species and 4 humans who looked like they hadn't slept in a week. The Marines came down hard and ready. They found Kairos 9 already taken. It was Hask who met the first of them. The laborer had refused to be carried. He stood on the limbs he had left, leaning on a Sauric rifle he used as a crutch at the mouth of the main landing bay when the Marines came through in full kit, weapons up, expecting the enemy. He looked at them out of a face built nothing like theirs, and said, in the broken Terran the translator gave him, the only thing that needed saying, "You're late." A wet, broken, 6-limbed breath. "We already won." Joseph found the 4 of them in the captured command relay an hour later. He was a big man and a tired one, and he stood in the wreckage of a place his intelligence had told him almost nothing about. Looking at 4 pirates, he'd scrambled a fleet to chase over 16 stolen crates. The math was plainly not the math he'd flown in expecting. "Marshall." He'd read the file on the way in. "Captain Rourke Marshall, you're under arrest. You and your crew. The processors, the smuggling, the deaths that came with it. That hasn't changed." "Didn't think it had," Marshall said. Joseph looked around the relay, at the cooling alloy, the freed prisoners, the scale of what 4 criminals had pulled down from the inside. "I came here to rescue you. Instead, I found you holding the place." "We did. I want to know what they were doing here." Joseph's eyes went to Brand's black arm, then lower, to the alloy leg braced beneath him. Marshall gave Jace a slight nod. Jace stepped forward with the slate. "Before this place fell, I pulled their archive. Project Ascension. Centuries of research. Every facility tied to it. Kairos 9 is only one entry on the list." He let that settle. Human compatibility data. Netherium research. The Duke who walked out of here carrying his own copy of it. Everything the Directorate is going to need when the Sauric come looking for humanity. Joseph was quiet for a moment. "You're offering to deal." "We're pirates," Marshall said. "We don't beg. We deal." He stood, slow and tired, until he was level with the general. "We're not asking for a pardon. We did what we did, and we'll answer for it. But when you go after the rest of Project Ascension, you're going to want the only 4 people who've ever torn one apart from the inside." Joseph looked at the slate, then at the prison. Then, longest of all, at Hask, leaning in the doorway, and the thousands of freed prisoners filling halls that had been grinding sentience to nothing for centuries. "No pardon," he said at last. "You serve. You're watched. You earn every inch of it. The first time you run, the deal's done." He held out his hand. "But you'll finish what you started here." Marshall looked at his crew. Bran, the enemy's alloy still bonded to his body. Collins, who had turned prisoners into an army. Jace, whose stolen archive had just bought them all another chance. Hask in the doorway, the empty place where Varuna should have been. One by one, they met Marshall's eyes and gave the smallest of nods. "That's a sentence," Marshall said. "It's a sentence," Joseph agreed. "Then we'll serve it." A soft chime sounded in Joseph's earpiece. He lifted a hand. "Joseph." "Sir?" Carter's voice came back over the secure channel. "I've shadowed the courier through its jump. Report." The vessel bearing Duke Zoran Valis' personal crest completed a single jump to Vascor, a private house Valis holding. I've maintained a safe distance under cloak, transmitting coordinates now. "Coordinates received," Joseph said. Joseph looked at the crew, then at Marshall. Looks like your sentence starts today. The training round left the ground on fire, and Jace still wouldn't shut up. You said the drone was on a fixed track. He hit the dirt behind a scorched barricade, chest heaving, a spent charge rifle across his knees. It is not on a fixed track. That thing is hunting me personally. I think you programmed it to hate me. I didn't have to program that, Carter said. He said it from the top of the observation platform, casually, a slate in one hand, watching the 4 of them get chewed up by a live-fire drill designed to break them. Captain Nick Carter did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. He'd learned early that with these 4, volume was a thing they'd been trained since birth to ignore, and dryness was a thing they couldn't. Marshall, left flank's open. Collins, you're dead. You just haven't been told yet. Bran. Bran didn't need telling. The Hunter drone came around the barricade low and fast, the way it had killed Collins twice already, and Bran met it in the air. He'd read its arc the way he read everything, and the Netherium leg drove him off the ground higher than a man had any business going, the black limb uncoiling under him with a whine of stressed alloy. He caught the drone one-handed at the top of the jump. The dark hand closed. The drone came apart like something had stepped on it. He landed in a crouch, the leg taking the whole shock without complaint, and flicked the ruined casing off his fingers into the dirt. For a second, nobody said anything. Even the range went quiet. "Okay, that's not fair," Jace said. "He gets to be a wrecking ball, and I get the drone with a grudge." "He gets to be a wrecking ball because he stopped arguing with the drill a month ago." Carter came down the platform steps. "You're still arguing with it. The training doesn't care about your opinion. Neither do I." Marshall hauled himself up off the flank Carter had called open, brushing grit off a shoulder that had taken a training bolt welt. He said nothing. He'd said very little for a month. He was watching Carter the way he watched everything now, measuring the man who held the leash, deciding, slowly, what he was worth. So far, the answer kept coming back the same, more than Marshall had expected, which annoyed him. "Again?" Collins asked, already reloading. "No." Carter checked the slate. "You're done. Joseph wants the 3 of you cleaned up and in the briefing room." He turned. "Bran. Not you. You're with me first. Medical wants another look at the leg." Jace's head came up. "Why does he always get the special treatment?" "Because he's got a Sauric weapons program bonded to his femur, and you've got a mouth," Carter said. "One of those is worth studying." Bran snorted. Jace opened his mouth, thought better of it, and for once let it go, which was the closest Jace had come to showing Carter respect all week. The medical team had stopped treating Bran like a patient and started treating him like a door they were trying to see through after his first week of drill training. He sat on the table while they ran the scans they ran every few days, and Carter leaned against the wall with his arms crossed and watched the readouts he'd long since learned to read. The 2 of them had fallen into an easy routine. Neither had planned it. Bran asked how things worked because he couldn't help asking, and Carter answered because he was one of the few people on the base who actually had the answers. Somewhere during that month of scans, the wariness between the pirate and the officer had worn down into something neither of them would have called friendship out loud. "Still nothing," the technician said, almost disappointed. "No inflammation at the junction. No immune flag. The bones remodeling around the anchor points, like it was always meant to be there." She shook her head. "I keep waiting for the catch." "There isn't one," Bran said. He flexed his hand. The fingers moved exactly the way fingers were supposed to move, except stronger, except faster, except they weren't fingers. That's the part nobody believes. I don't feel it. I stopped noticing it weeks ago. I go to scratch my face, and it's just my hand. My brain doesn't think of it as metal anymore." Carter watched him do it. "That's the thing that should frighten you, and it doesn't." "Should it frighten you?" "Nope. But it frightens the scientists. Carter pushed off the wall. Come on, Joseph wants you to hear this part too. Joseph was waiting in the small briefing room with a stillness that Bran had come to understand was the man thinking 3 conversations ahead of the one he was having. General William Joseph did not look like a chess player. He looked like any other senior officer at first glance. Bran had stopped trusting first impressions almost immediately. Sit, Joseph said. You should hear what your arm is buying us. He turned a slate around. Bran didn't understand half of it, but he understood the shape of them all. Cell structures, growth curves, a limb that wasn't his growing in a tank. Your compatibility isn't a fluke of you, Joseph said. It's human. We've confirmed it. The alloy the Sauric used to butcher 100 species doesn't fight our biology. It partners with it. Do you understand what a lesser people would do with that? Build an army, Bran said. Cut the arms off soldiers and bolt on better ones. Do what the Sauric did. Just do it to ourselves and win. Yes. Joseph didn't flinch from it. He turned the slate again. A different image now. An amputee's scan. An old injury. And beside it, a projection of what the alloy could give back. We're not going to grow weapons. We're going to grow limbs, hearts. We ran it on animals. A lung, replaced, functioning. The thing they built to make monsters, we're going to use to put people back together. He let that sit. That's the difference between us and the Duke. He looked at your body and saw a resource. We looked at it and saw everyone we could save. Bran was quiet a moment. You know why I let your scientists study me. Tell me about it. Because if it killed me, you'd learn something. He looked at the growing limb in the tank. And if it didn't, I'd have to go find a new reason to keep breathing. Turns out, he nodded at the scan, the amputee, the projection of a leg given back to someone who'd lost one. That's not a bad reason. Joseph almost smiled. No, he said. It isn't. Hask had spent the month healing, and the healing had been its own kind of experiment. The Sauric fire at the forge controls had taken 2 of his 6 limbs, and should have taken the rest of him with them. It hadn't. The Directorate surgeons had kept the big laborer alive through the worst of it, and then they'd done something the Sauric had spent centuries failing to do. They'd given the limbs back. Alloy, grown and shaped from everything they'd learned off Bran's body, fitted to a frame built nothing like a human's. The same gift the Duke had forced on a pirate to see if it would kill him, offered this time to a freed prisoner, because it might let him walk whole again. It had worked. Hask came into the yard on the new limbs, slow and careful, still learning their weight, testing what they'd carry. But the laborer was whole again in his strange 6-limbed way, and the wounds that should have ended him at the forge had closed for good. General Joseph had offered him a place. Soldier, if he wanted it, he'd earned it twice over. Or he could stay with the crew, run with the pirates who'd freed him. 2 doors, both open. Hask had asked for a third. I want to build, he told Joseph, through the translator, and the big laborer's hands moved as he said it, always moving, always shaping something in the air. Not walls, not weapons. I carried the things other people made my whole life. 40 years. I never got to make one. A rumble deep in his chest. I'm good with my hands. I know I don't look it. I know what they wrote on my file. He flexed all 6 limbs, the alloy 2 among them. I want to teach children to make things. Small ones. Toys. Chairs. Whatever they want. I like children. They don't look at me and see the strongest back on the floor. They just see big. The sound he made might have been a laugh. I'm very good at big. So they'd found him a colony that would have him. A frontier world building its first real schools, eager for a teacher who could raise a workshop with his own 6 hands. They'd put him on a transport headed out to it. He'd hugged Bran before he went, which on a six-limbed creature was an experience, and told Jace to stay out of trouble, and told Collins nothing because the two of them had already said it, and left to go be the thing the Sarek had never once thought to let him be. The transport carried teachers, school supplies, and a scatter of children headed out to the same new colony, along with one enormous former prisoner who was going to teach them all to build. It was, by every measure that mattered, the least military ship in human space. Far past the Veil, on a world that had never known a war it couldn't win, Duke Zeran Valis received a guest he had not invited and could not refuse. Vascor was his private holding, his sanctuary, the seat of his house, and the vault of his life's work. He had fled here from the ruin of Kairos 9 with the only thing worth carrying, and here he had begun, patiently, to rebuild. The research core was safe. The list was intact. The dream was undamaged. A facility was only a place. The work went on. Count Maldrick did not announce himself the way a lesser noble would have. He simply arrived, and the arriving was the message. He was heavier than Valis, older in the way that mattered, and he moved through Valis's own halls as though he were considering buying them. "You lost a world," Maldrick said without greeting. "An entire testing world. To stock." "I preserved the program," Valis said. "The world was replaceable. What I carried out of it was not. What you carried out of it is why I'm here." Maldrick stopped at the tall window that looked over Vascor's spires and did not look at his host. "The houses whisper, Valis. They whisper that you found something, a species that doesn't reject the alloy, that takes it and lives and grows strong." He turned to face the Duke. "The humans." Valis did not deny it. There was no profit in denying it to Maldrick, who held the loyalty of a dozen minor houses in his hand, and could, if he chose, make the difference between Valis rising and Valis vanishing. On paper, a duke stood above a count. In the arithmetic that actually ruled the Sarek, Maldrick's dozen small blades outweighed Valis's single great name. "They're the key," Valis said. "Not a curiosity. The key. Every species we ever ran rotted around the alloy. The humans wear it like it was made for them." He crossed to a display and woke it, and the image of a human arm turned in the light. Bran's arm, the one that had lived. "Imagine it, Maldrick. Not 100 fragile subjects. An army. Human bodies. Alloy bones. Strong past anything the Sarek have ever fielded. And obedient. Grown to obey. A weapon that walks and fights and never questions." His voice did not rise. "Whoever holds that army holds every world worth holding. The houses would kneel. There would be one seat at the top of the Sarek, and one creature in it. You. Me. Do you understand what you've just told me?" Valis said nothing. "You've described a future in which houses like mine become unnecessary. Only if you choose the wrong side." Maldrick's eyes narrowed. "Do you truly believe I'll stand aside while you build the thing that replaces me?" Valis met his gaze without flinching. "No," he said. "I believe you'll decide whether to stand beside me or beneath me." Silence settled between them. At last, Maldrick spoke again. "And the humans? This species you'd build your throne on. What are they?" "Cattle that learn to talk." Valis waved a hand, dismissing the whole of them. "Clever cattle. They ran when we caged them. They squalled and they scattered. They're a resource with opinions, nothing more. The only remarkable thing about them is their marrow, and I intend to harvest it." And there it was, the whole of him laid out plain. Maldrick heard it and said nothing. A count who commanded a dozen houses did not waste warnings on a duke who had not yet decided whether to become his enemy. He would watch. He would let Valis reach for his throne. And if the cattle proved to be something other than cattle, that would be worth knowing, and it would cost Maldrick nothing to learn it at Valis's expense. Reach for your throne, Duke. But if you reach for mine as well. He paused without looking back. I'll remove the arm before it can. Close! The transport carrying Hask left the colony without ceremony, the way the least military ship in human space should. It did not leave alone. No one aboard knew it. The children pressed to the ports to watch the colony shrink. The teachers counted heads. Hask sat folded into a cargo hold widened just for him. None of them knew the empty black around their unarmed transport wasn't empty at all. Joseph did not send children into deep space without an answer waiting in the dark. He simply saw no reason to tell them the answer was there. The Sauric raiders came out of a short jump with the confidence of predators who had scouted easy prey. A soft target, unarmed, unescorted, human. Exactly what the Duke's standing orders wanted. Capture, not destroy. Take the cattle alive. They swept in fast and wide to bracket the transport and herd it, the way they had herded 100 helpless things before, certain of the shape of what came next. They had made one assumption. It was the same assumption their Duke made about the whole human species, and it was wrong in the same way. They assumed that what they couldn't see wasn't there. The escort had been running dark the entire time, not with the crude invisibility the Sauric understood and could sometimes claw through, but with something the Sauric had no word for. It wasn't only machinery, it was patience. It was ships flown by people who'd spent a species' worth of history learning to be the thing in the grass that the bigger animal never noticed until it moved. The Sauric expected technology and could hunt technology. They did not expect to be outthought by the meat they'd come to collect. The dark moved. The raiders never reformed into a fight. There wasn't a fight. There was only empty space where their scanners said there should be empty space. Then the darkness came alive. The human escort resolved out of the black, already firing, striking from angles the Sauric hadn't known were occupied. Before the raiders understood they had flown into a trap, the box had already closed around them. It was over the way a snare is over. Quick, total, bloodlessly on the human side. The transport flew on toward the new colony with its children at the ports, never having felt the thing that had reached for it and died. Word of it went up the human chain fast and reached General Joseph in his formal service uniform. He read the report standing, then set it down slowly. Joseph had known the raid would come. He'd staked children on knowing it, and the stake had held. And he did not let himself feel the size of what he'd risked because there was no time for it now. The Duke had reached for human children. That confirmed what Joseph already believed about Valis. Nothing was beneath him if it served his ambition. It also told Joseph what came next. The game had changed. He started, Joseph said, to no one, to the report in his hand. Good. Now he's on my clock. He keyed his slate. Get me Carter, and the pirates. A pause, and something almost grim beneath the calm. Tell Marshall his sentence just got interesting. Joseph didn't call it a hunt. He called it correcting a misapprehension, which was worse. The Duke believes he's the predator, he said. The crew stood in the briefing room where a month of leash had brought them, Carter at Joseph's shoulder. The four of them arranged in the loose, insolent spread of men who'd never once stood at attention in their lives and weren't going to start. He reached for a ship full of our children because his whole understanding of us says we're soft, scattered, and slow. That understanding is the most valuable thing on the board. I don't want to break it. I want to feed it. You want him confident, Marshall said. I want him confident and moving. A cautious Valis sits on Vascor rebuilding his program for a decade, and we never touch him. A confident Valis comes out where I can reach him. Joseph turned the display. Sauric operations bloomed across it. Capture routes, staging points, the machinery of a duke hunting a species. So we're going to hurt his operation, not randomly. Precisely. Every strike shaped to tell him a story about who we are. And the story is going to be a lie he already believes. Jace crossed his arms. And we're the ones swinging the hammer because you four are the only humans alive who've torn a Sauric facility apart from the inside, and because I can spend you in ways I can't spend a regular unit. Joseph said it without cruelty and without apology. You're on a sentence. This is the sentence. Carter runs the operation. You run with him. Under him, Jace corrected sourly. Under me, Carter agreed. Easy. You'll hate it. Get in the ship. The ship was the Black Tide, and that was Joseph's doing too. They'd fixed her during the month, patched the full damage from the blind jump that started all this, stripped the smuggling holds, hung real weapons on a hull that had never carried more than enough to run. She flew like herself and hit like something new. The first time Collins put his hands on the controls after they gave her back, he felt the difference immediately. She answered faster, cleaner, like she'd been rebuilt around the way he flew instead of simply repaired. Their first strike was a capture vessel, one of the Duke's slaver hulls, the kind that had come for the school ship, sitting fat and confident over a mining colony it had come to harvest. Carter took them in dark, and the Sauric ship never saw the Black Tide until she was against its flank, and the boarding tube bit into the hull. Then it was close work, and close work was where Bran stopped being a man with a strange arm and became the thing the Sauric had accidentally built. The first boarders met them in the airlock corridor, and Bran went through them. There was no other word for it. The Nitherium leg drove him down the corridor faster than the Sauric guns could track, and the black arm took the first one's weapon and the wall behind it in the same motion, tearing a mount out of the bulkhead and swinging the whole mess like a club. He hit a sealed pressure door at a dead run, and it lost. He caught a Sauric that had a bead on Collins and simply removed it from the fight, one-handed, the alloy closing with that whine of stressed metal that Carter had learned meant something was about to break, and it wouldn't be Bran. Carter fought behind him and to the side, disciplined where Bran was a landslide, dropping the ones Bran drew into the open. And part of Carter's mind, the part that never stopped working, the part Joseph had promoted him for, was taking notes. He'd trained these four for a month. He'd read the files. He had not, until this corridor, understood what he was training. Marshall moved like he'd never in his life needed to be told what to do. Collins flew the boarding like he flew everything, by feel, a half-second ahead. Jace was already gone, vanished toward the ship's core the instant the tube sealed, because Jace's war was never in the corridor, it was in the machine. "Bridge is yours," Jace's voice came over the comm, bored, from somewhere deep in a ship that wasn't his. I locked their internal doors. They're stuck in the compartments they were standing in. You're welcome. Also, I'm taking everything that isn't nailed down, and some things that are. They took the capture vessel in the time it took the Sauric to understand they'd been boarded. And when it was done, and the Duke's slaver hull hung dead and open, Jace came back to the Tide with an armful of Sauric hardware and a grin, and one thing he set down more carefully than the rest, a battered human comms relay, half melted, that they had not brought with them. "Found their salvage bin," he said. "They've been scooping up our wreckage, learning us from our own junk." He turned the relay over. "Rude, but useful. I've got an idea." Carter looked at the relay, then at Jace, and did the thing that annoyed Jace most, which was understand him immediately. "You want to poison the well," Carter said. "I want to poison the well," Jace agreed. "They steal our broken toys and crack them for intel. So we let them steal one that tells them exactly what the general wants them to hear. General Joseph had already planned exactly that. Marshall wasn't surprised anymore. That was the thing about Joseph. By the time everyone else reached the idea, he was usually 3 moves past it. Marshall had stopped finding that unsettling and started finding it useful. "He'll never believe a leak," Joseph said when they brought it to him. "Hand a paranoid Duke a secret, and he weighs it for a trap. But a thing he steals off a battlefield, cracks with his own people, breaks open through our sloppy encryption," he almost smiled, "that he'll trust. Because trusting it means we were careless. And being careless is the one thing Valis is absolutely certain we are. So they built it the way you build a real mistake. Jace laced a relay core with genuine operational traffic. True routes, true supply notes, true chatter, all of it verifiable, all of it checkable, because the lie had to live inside a body of truth to breathe. And buried in the true traffic, encrypted just badly enough to look like a corner cut under fire, was the one thread Joseph wanted the Duke to pull. The compatible human. The prize. Bran, moving through a lightly held staging point aboard a vessel a confident predator could take. "You're using me as the worm on the hook," Bran said, looking at the routing that carried his own name into the enemy's hands. "I'm using what he wants," Joseph said. "He doesn't want a battle. He wants you. The one body on that centuries-long list that lived. He'd trade a fleet for you." He met Bran's eyes. "So he's going to. And when he reaches for me?" "Then he's not on Vaskor," Joseph said, "and he's not looking where the other hand is." They let the Sarek recover the relay the way they'd recovered all the others. Not handed over, but found aboard a piece of human wreckage left where the Duke's scavengers were always going to look. Valis's people brought it home and cracked it. They fought through the sloppy encryption and felt, in cracking it, the small, proud certainty of hunters who'd outworked their prey. Everything they found confirmed that certainty, because everything in it was true, except for one thread. And that single lie inherited the credibility of every truth wrapped around it. Somewhere past the veil, a brilliant Duke read a routing that told him the key to his throne was sitting nearly undefended, exactly where clever cattle would carelessly leave it, and believed it completely, because believing it cost him nothing, and despising the beings who'd been so careless cost him even less. It cost, though. A lie only worked if everything around it stayed true. To keep the Duke believing the story, humanity still had to fight a real war, and real wars took real ships. Every victory couldn't be too easy. Every retreat couldn't be avoided. The deception had to be paid for in steel and blood, or it stopped being believable. Valis, confident and moving now, committed harder. He was brilliant. Joseph never let the crew forget that. Never let the word cattle in the enemy's mouth become a word in their own. The Duke fought his fleet well. He read human tactics fast and adapted faster, and there was an engagement over a contested colony where that adaptation nearly destroyed them, where Sauric warships closed a trap of their own and human hulls died in the dark for it. The black tide came out of its scarred and streaming atmosphere, with Collins fighting the controls the whole way. They limped to a rally point to make repairs, and it was there, in the guts of a wounded ship, that the leash finished becoming a crew. Bran was jammed shoulder-deep in a coolant conduit that was trying to cook him, and it was Carter who was down there with him, holding the line clear. Not a technician, not one of his own officers. Carter, sleeves burned, doing a pirate's work because the pirate needed a second set of hands, and his happened to be nearest. "You didn't have to come down here," Bran said over the hiss. "And you didn't have to pull that border off Collins," Carter said. "I saw it. He's a pirate. You're a pirate. Neither of you owes the other anything a court would recognize." "He's crew." "I know." Carter finally looked at him, something worn and honest in it. That's the part your file doesn't have. It's got the ships you took and the men you killed, and it doesn't have the word crew anywhere in it. And that word is the only thing in this whole war I actually trust about the four of you. He went back to the line. Don't tell Jace I said anything nice. He'll put it on the hull. Up in the wreck of the mess, Jace was doing the thing Jace did after a battle that had gone badly. Talking too much, too fast, needling Carter's absent name, working the fear off the way other men worked it off with drink. And when Carter came up from the conduit burned and filthy, Jace opened his mouth to fire the first shot of the usual war, and looked at the man's ruined sleeves and the pirate's grime on a captain's hands and closed it again. You look like one of us, Jace said instead. It came out wrong-footed, almost grudging, almost warm. Don't insult me, Carter said. He dropped into the seat across from them, filthy as the rest, without a second thought. That was the moment it happened. Not a speech, not a rescue. Just an officer sitting down among pirates as though there had never been a line between them. Quietly, without any of them saying it aloud, Carter stopped being the leash. He became the fifth. Marshall watched it happen from across the mess and said nothing. But he'd decided a while back what Carter was worth. The answer had stopped annoying him. The Duke took the bait. Word came, the way Joseph had known it would. Valis moved his fleet with the confidence of a predator that had found the soft throat of its prey, committing his strength toward the staging point where a careless species had left its most precious asset lying in the open. He came for Bran. He came for the key to his throne, certain he was closing a trap, never once feeling the shape of the larger one closing around him, because feeling it would have required believing that cattle could think a move ahead of a duke, and that was a thing Zoran Valis was constitutionally unable to believe. On Vaskor, Count Maldric watched the Duke's fleet pull toward its prize and made his own cold arithmetic. He had promised nothing. He had risked nothing. He would not spend his dozen houses defending Valis's reach, and he would not warn the Duke of a danger the Duke was too proud to see. Because if the humans were only cattle, Valis lost nothing by Maldric's silence, and if the humans were something else, Maldric would learn it at no cost to himself, from a safe and instructive distance. In the briefing room, Joseph stood over the board he'd been building since a report of a heat bloom beyond the veil had first crossed his desk. He's moving on the bait, Joseph said. His fleet goes one way. That leaves Vaskor thin. He looked at Carter, then at the four. You've spent this whole war teaching him we're careless. He's about to spend his whole fleet acting on it. While he reaches for Bran in the dark, you're going to walk into his house through the door he left open, and you're going to take everything that makes his dream possible, and then you're going to burn the rest. And the Duke? Marshall asked. The Duke reaches for the prize, Joseph said, and finds out what the prize is. He didn't smile. He'd staked too much to smile yet. But the board was set. Valis's fleet drawn one way toward a hook with Bran's name on it, Joseph's strength poised to meet it, and Carter and the four aimed at an undefended Vaskor. From the wings, a count watched with his blades sheathed, unwilling to spend a single house until he knew whether Valis's ambition would make him master of the Sarek or destroy him. Get in the ship, Carter said. This time, nobody argued. The trap sprang in two places at once, and Valis only ever saw one of them. He came for the prize, the way a great predator comes for a throat it's already decided is bared, his fleet pouring toward the staging point, where careless cattle had left the key to his throne lying in the open, his flagship at the center of it, his certainty absolute. Somewhere in the dark ahead was the one human body that had worn the alloy and lived. He had crossed the ruin of one world and the patience of a rebuilt program to reach it. He did not slow. Slowing was for creatures that could imagine being wrong. He never saw the other half of the trap close. Joseph's fleet met him in the black exactly where Joseph had decided it would. The collision of fleets lit the darkness, drawing every eye, every sensor, every thought. And beneath the cover of that battle, a single modified freighter that no Sauric sensor had tagged slipped silently toward Vascor. With most of the Duke's fleet committed elsewhere, Vascor's skies had gone thin. Carter took the black tide through them like a knife through a door left unlocked. Maldrek kept his houses out of it, Jace said, reading the near-empty defense grid with something between delight and offense. The Duke's own count let him bleed alone. There's nobody home. There's somebody home, Carter said. There's just nobody who matters. He brought them down hard onto a landing spar that served the heart of the holding, the vault spire, where a Duke kept the only thing he'd ever truly loved. Marshall, Collins, Jace, with me. We take the core, then we bring the whole thing down. A beat. Brand's keeping the Duke busy. Let's not waste the time he's buying us. They went in through a door built to keep equals out. Never prisoners, because no prisoner had ever been meant to stand on Vascor. It was like the Forge controls all over again, and it was nothing like it, because this time they weren't desperate. They were the ones who'd planned it. Carter ran the assault the way he ran everything, disciplined and dry, and the three pirates ran beside him as the thing they'd become, a crew with a leash they'd stopped feeling. The Duke's household guard was real, and it was good, and it was far too little. Spread thin across a house its master had assumed no lesser being would ever dare enter. Marshall fought like a man who'd decided the outcome an hour ago and was just walking it forward. Collins covered angles by instinct. And Jace peeled off into the systems the second they breached the core level, riding House Valis' own network, the way he'd ridden Sethric's. Except this one wasn't walled against rivals. It was the private vault of a single paranoid Duke, and Jace went through its locks and found, at the center of it, the thing the whole war had been built on. The research core, Project Ascension Entire, the centuries-long list, the compatibility data, the blueprint for an army of enslaved humanity. Got it, Jace said quietly, and for once there was nothing light in it. He pulled the program, the list, every world still standing on it out of the Duke's vault and into a directorate core no bigger than his palm. Then he erased the source, wiping the Duke's archive clean. All of it, he said. Everything they learned from 100 species. Everything they wanted to do to us. He looked up. It's ours now. Never theirs again. They set Vascor to burn from its own heart. The vault spire's power core, the research halls beneath it, the seat of the whole rotten dream, all of it rigged to come down. And as they pulled back toward the black tide with the sum of ascension in Jace's pocket, the seat of House Valis began, spire by spire, to die behind them. Out in the black, Joseph fought the battle Valis thought he was winning. Human ships died there. That was the cost, and Joseph carried it without flinching and without pretending it was free. Hulls broke in the dark, and good crews went with them. The Duke's fleet was brilliant and vicious, and Valis was no fool in a battle. He read Joseph's lines and countered them, adapted, pressed. Anyone watching the raw shape of it might have thought the Duke had the better of it. But Joseph wasn't fighting to win the battle. He was fighting to hold Valis' eyes. Every human maneuver kept the Duke leaning forward, certain the prize was just past the next exchange. Human ships appeared where the Sauric had cleared space, and vanished where they brought guns to bear. A whole fleet flown like a thing that had spent its history learning to be unseen until it chose otherwise. The Sauric kept losing to something they had no word for. People who thought like prey, precisely so they could stop being it. Then the word reached the flagship, and Joseph saw the exact moment it landed. Voskor. Falling. The house, the vault, the program. Gone, taken by cattle that had walked through the door the Duke himself had left open. And the Duke did exactly what Joseph had built the trap for. He did not die for a lost cause. He abandoned the fleet and the burning house alike, reaching instead for the one thing that could still save his dream. The compatible human. Bran. There it is, Joseph said, watching the reports settle into place. Off he goes to collect his cattle. He keyed the channel that mattered. Bran. He's coming to you. Let him. Bran had been the bait the whole time, and he'd never once pretended otherwise. He waited aboard a lightly held human vessel exactly where the poisoned relay had promised the Duke he'd be, a handful of Directorate personnel around him, and the alloy quiet in his bones. And he watched the Duke's flagship resolve out of the dark and grapple onto the hull with the confidence of a creature collecting a possession. The Sarek boarders came through certain of what they'd find. A soft, fragile, careless thing to be seized and carried home. What they found was the one human in the galaxy the alloy had made for exactly this. Bran went through them. The Netherium leg drove him down the boarding corridor faster than their guns could track, and the black arm took the first through a bulkhead, and the second off his feet, and the third apart at the wall. Bran tore through the Duke's chosen boarders in the guts of the ship sent to take him, faster and stronger than anything the Sarek had ever built or fielded. Behind the fighting, the Black Tide came out of the dark with the rest of his crew aboard, Voskor burning at their backs, and grappled onto the flagship from the other side. They converged on the Duke's command deck from two directions, and Duke Zoran Valis, for the first time in the whole long war, understood that something had gone wrong. He stood among his guard as the humans came through and looked at Bran, the alloy arm, the alloy leg, the impossible human who wore the Duke's own work against him. Even now, even here, Valis's face held not fear, but affronted wonder. The prize had come to him after all, not in chains, looking at him the way a man looks at something he's finally cornered. You're the one, Valis said, not to Bran, about him. The compatible one. He stepped forward, the old greed untouched by the burning of his house or the breaking of his fleet. He reached for Bran's alloy arm the way a collector reaches for the piece that completes the set. Do you understand what you are? You're the key to a Thrawn. I'm not yours, Bran said. He caught the reaching arm in the alloy hand. The Duke had forced that gift into his body to watch it kill him. Instead, it had brought him here. Bran closed his hand. Zoran Valis died by the weapon he had built for someone he believed was beneath him. His own contempt had carried him to the only place it could no longer protect him, within arm's reach of the man he'd tried to turn into a tool. The Duke reached for a possession. The possession reached back. Count Maldric had seen everything he needed to see. He had built his power on always knowing which way the arithmetic ran. He ran it one last time and arrived at a number that changed everything. Humanity was no longer the prey Valis had believed it to be, but a patient enemy that had outthought a brilliant Duke and destroyed him in a single stroke. The Count opened contact with the human fleet himself and offered the one thing his kind offered only to equals worth fearing. Peace, not alliance. His houses would not help humanity, but neither would they trouble it again. The war Valis had begun had died with Valis. Joseph accepted, not because he believed peace would last forever, but because the message beneath it mattered more than the offer itself. Somewhere beyond the veil, the most powerful Count of the Sarek had looked at humanity, recalculated the balance of power, and decided that war was no longer worth the price. They had stopped being prey. They had become the thing the galaxy learned not to reach for. The war ended, as wars do, in paperwork and quiet. The fleet stood down. The dead were counted somewhere Marshall didn't have to watch. And the four of them came back to a directorate base, with a sentence technically still hanging over their heads, and nothing left to do but wait to find out what winning had earned them. What it had earned them was sitting in a holding bay. 4 of the original 16 crates were there, and Jace found them the way Jace found everything, by looking where he wasn't supposed to. Jace came into the ready room and didn't waste a breath. "Found our crates." That got their heads up. Jace led them down to the holding bay, and there they were. Directorate stamps, scratched but not gone. The exact quantum processors that had started the whole saga, 2 systems past the veil and a lifetime ago. They were sitting nearly unguarded, in a bay with 1 lightly manned checkpoint, and a captain standing at it, who happened to be looking the wrong way. "Huh," Jace said slowly. Marshall said nothing. He was doing the math, and the math was coming out strange. Joseph would never leave those crates unguarded. They belonged to the original cargo, which made leaving them there make even less sense. And the checkpoint was being held by the one officer who'd fought beside them the whole war, standing with his back turned and his hands conspicuously empty. "He's giving them to us," Brand said quietly. "That's a pardon nobody has to sign." "That's not a pardon," Marshall said. "A pardon goes in a file. This." He looked at Carter's turned back, at the open bay, at the silent shape of it. This never happened. No record. No mercy. Just a door left open. He almost smiled. The general doesn't give pardons. He gives you a way out and looks the other way. Jace was already grinning, and the grin had a problem in it, which was Carter. "There's a checkpoint," Jace said. "It's manned." "It's manned by a friend," Brand said. "We're not." But Jace was already moving, because Jace had wanted to do this specific thing for the entire war, and the plan gave him a reason, and a reason was all Jace had ever needed. He hit Carter over the back of the head once, efficiently, with the flat of a Sauric sidearm. "Jace!" Bran was down beside Carter in an instant, checking the man's skull with hands that could crush bulkheads, and were, right now, absurdly gentle. "That was too hard. That was way too hard, you idiot. He's fine." Jace was already hoisting a crate, delighted, unrepentant. "That man's skull has survived worse arguments with me. He's the stubbornest thing in human space. A little tap like that. He'll wake up cranky and take 3 weeks to admit it hurt." He caught Brand's look and softened, fractionally, in the way Jace only ever softened. "He's fine, Bran, I promise. Besides," the grin came back, "I've wanted to do that since the first day he told me to get in the ship." Bran looked at Carter, unconscious and breathing steady on the deck, and did not entirely forgive Jace, because somewhere in the last month, the officer holding their leash had become a man Bran would miss. He got the captain propped safe against the wall, careful of the head, and only then picked up his own crate. "He is a good man," Bran said. "Shame on you." Carter woke up in the infirmary with his head bandaged and General Joseph sitting beside the bunk, and the first thing he did was crack a joke, because that was the only apology Carter's kind of pride allowed. "I've had better days," he said. The bandage went most of the way around his skull. "Headache'll fade, eventually. Your pirate has a real talent for the back of a man's head." "He does," Joseph agreed. "He didn't have to enjoy it that much." "No," Joseph said. "But you didn't have to let him." Carter didn't answer. He'd seen the blow coming and let it land, because the plan only worked if it looked like a theft, and 4 criminals walked out a door no record would ever admit had been opened. It was the most pirate thing an honest officer had ever done, and he'd done it on purpose. He'd joke about the headache for the rest of his life, but never about the reason. A soft chime sounded on Joseph's wrist. He lifted the device, and a small blue figure resolved above it, Marshall, transmitting from a ship that was already somewhere it couldn't be traced. "General," Marshall said. "Captain." Marshall held his gaze for a moment. Nothing needed explaining. They'd both done the math. "I just wanted to say the sentence is served," Marshall said. "In full." A pause. "You ran a clean war, General. Cleaner than we deserved." "You fought a hard one," Joseph said. "That balances a lot of ledgers. If you ever need the balance tipped again," Marshall's mouth moved, not quite a smile. "Just say the word. Something tells me you've got a way to find us." "I do," Joseph said. From the bunk, bandaged and propped up and watching the whole thing through the holographic light, Carter lifted a hand. "Marshall." His voice was rough, but the dryness was still in it, unbroken, playful under the ache. "Tell Jace he could have been less thorough. This headache's going to outlast the war." A beat. "And tell him next time I get to take a swing. One clean shot, his choosing of the moment so we're even. That's the deal, or I hunt him down on principle." The little blue hologram of Marshall almost laughed. "He'll like that," he said. "He's already fond of you. Won't admit it, though. Just like you." "Wouldn't dream of admitting it," Carter said, and the light cut out. The war was over, and somewhere out past the veil, 4 pirates were flying free with 4 crates of the cargo they'd started with, and a debt paid in a coin no court would ever count. Aboard the Black Tide, jumping clear of Directorate space for the last time, Jace finally said the thing that had been bothering him since the holding bay. "Wait a minute." He turned from his console. "What did I miss? Did you and the General plan all this? The crates, the door, Carter standing there with his back turned. Did the 2 of you cook the whole thing?" "Of course not." Marshall didn't look up from the nav. "Don't be stupid. Joseph's a serving officer. He's not going to throw away a career like his for 4 smugglers. There was no deal. Nothing happened." "So then, what?" "He's a man who does things right." Marshall finally looked at him. "After everything, the right thing was to let us go. So he built a war where letting us go looked like us getting away with something. No pardon. No record. Just a door. And a captain who forgot to watch it." He turned back to the controls. "That's not a plan, Jace. That's just a good man being one where nobody's looking. Try to recognize it. You won't see it often." Bran was quiet a moment, looking back the way they'd come, toward the fleet and the infirmary, and the officer with the bandaged head. "I'll miss Carter," he said. A beat. Shame he's not a smuggler. He'd have been one of us. Collins laughed from the pilot's seat, the first easy laugh any of them had managed in a long time. "Next stop?" he asked. Jace put his boots up on the console, feet up, the way they'd been the very first time, a lifetime and a war ago, and grinned at the black ahead of them. "Any planet with cards, booze, and women," he said. "Not necessarily in that order." Marshall shook his head. Collins was still laughing. Bran almost smiled. And the Black Tide folded into the dark and was gone. 4 free men and the cargo they'd started with, flying out past every chart into whatever came next. No cage behind them, no leash, no sentence.
Hey there, space human. I'm really curious about your thoughts on this video. Drop a quick comment and let me know what's on your mind. Or just say hi if you prefer. Either way, I'd love to hear from you. Also, remember to check the pinned comment. Trust me, it's worth a look. Oh, and one last thing. I've chosen another video for you to watch. Just click the card here, or here if you want the whole playlist. See you there.